Welcome to a tale that spins like the intricate gears of a jet engine, one that combines the wonders of mechanical engineering with the tumultuous emotions of the human heart. Today, I invite you on a journey that spans the heavens and delves into the hidden chambers of the heart. Our protagonist, a man whose passion for jet engines is rivaled only by his love for his wife, Karen, finds himself drawn into a saga of love, loss, and the search for understanding. This story explores the contrasts life held between the precision of machines and the unpredictability of human relationships. Imagine the silence of an airport observation deck, the anticipation hovering in the air, combined with the roar of a Boeing 737 airplane coming to life. By the way, there will be 2 endings to this story, so be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss either of them. And she was hiding it. Chapter 1. You couldn't hear the roar of the Boeing 737 turbofan engines from the airport observation deck, but you could see the big airplane shudder when it gets 20,000 pounds of thrust. The jet engine is an amazing creation. It is as beautiful as any work of art and has the deceptive simplicity of a flower, each delicate detail intricately dependent on the others. I have devoted most of my life to a passion for these beautiful and powerful creations. They are the first of my great passions, the second being my wife Karen. My 2 great loves are my wife and jet engines. It may seem strange to you that I hate airplanes and airports. This is partly because the worst moments in my life have happened in airports. The first time I left home to join the Navy, I said goodbye to my parents at the airport. 4 years later, I came home to the same airport, but with no one else. My parents both died while I was in the service. I'm an only child, and loneliness doesn't describe how I felt coming home. But the worst part was leaving my wife and kids behind and flying off to war, knowing that they would be alone, with no family to rely on, and I would be on the other side of the world fighting a war. That was over 20 years ago. Today, I dropped Karen off at the airport at 5:45 on a rainy fall morning. Being apart for 2 weeks was depressing. We had been married for 26 years. She was leaving to travel across the country to visit our grown children. My wife suffered from empty nest syndrome, or so I thought. I buried my feelings and sent her off with a smile and a request to come home as soon as you can. We have 2 boys. The youngest left home at 18 to attend UCLA, and I've only seen him 4 times since then. Twice he came home, and twice we traveled to California, but none of the 4 visits lasted longer than 2 days. All 4 visits were strangely uncomfortable and awkward. The older boy was a bit more of a homebody. He was very hard to get rid of. He attended a university up the hill from our Victorian-style house, and except for the first semester of his freshman year, lived on the very top floor of our 4-story house. He finished grad school without leaving home, and only moved 6 months ago to take a job in Chicago. Don't get me wrong, I love my sons. When they were little, I enjoyed their company and loved them more than life itself. Now, however, the children I loved are 2 grown men with whom I have nothing in common. In each other's company, we are bored, awkward, and, in my opinion, I think it would be better if we kept our memories of each other. It's different with my wife. She has some inner need for more than I can give her. My oldest son moved to Chicago. For the first few months after he moved, Karen seemed normal, but then it was like I came home and found her in mourning. She was grieving, and there wasn't much I could do about it. Having worked for the New York State Department of Health for 28 years, Karen has a lot of vacation time that she earns every year and accumulates year after year. Since we didn't take a vacation this year, she planned a visit to see the kids, as she called my 2 tall, well-built sons. I was unable to carve out time for my current research work at the university. My current government contract is behind schedule, and the work gave me an excuse not to drag myself across the country to see my children, who would prefer to limit their interaction with me to short phone conversations. I'm going to miss Karen. Like I said, we were together for 26 years more, if you count the courtship. We met when I retired from the Navy after 4 years of service. I'm a mechanical engineer specializing in jet engines. I served aboard an aircraft carrier where I gained a reputation for being someone who could fix anything. I think it's a talent, almost a sense of what's wrong with an engine. I seem to have an uncanny knack for spotting a problem before it occurs and causes the airplane to break down. 4 years of engine repair was more than enough. Working in the Navy was grueling, An aircraft carrier could be a pressure cooker for those in charge, and therefore responsible. Every time an airplane took off, you silently prayed that it would come back in one piece, and more importantly, that you wouldn't miss anything. I met Karen at a health fair at the Empire State Plaza, which locals call the South Mall, about 2 weeks after I got back from the Navy. It's a huge complex. When viewed from the street, or better yet, from across the river, it is an impressive complex of monolithic structures. The most distinctive is a building in the shape of a flying saucer, which gives the shopping center a futuristic look. The saucer is called the Egg and is a theater complex. Inside the mall is a long sterile series of corridors running between the state capitol, the state museum, and state office buildings. The sterility is broken by the collection of contemporary art on display in this public space. Due to the fact that the artwork has been attacked by deranged individuals in the past, a security system has been installed here. After visiting the Civil Service Administration looking for a job, I wandered around the South Trade Center because I had no real job other than the Naval Reserve. I remained in the reserves for many years after I finished active duty. In the hallway of the mall, I walked past tables where medical examinations were being conducted. Karen worked at the tables doing the screening. She is a nurse, but became a healthcare administrator in the state. Her employer had a new commissioner at the time, and he had a strong focus on community outreach. Smiling seductively and blinking her golden brown eyes, she talked me into having my blood pressure checked, which I failed. I could see the worry appear on her pretty oval face as she tossed back her shoulder-length hair. They call her strawberry blonde, a redhead with the very temper that sometimes breaks out. However, her color is more of a golden blonde than a redhead. Brown eyes and hair were an unexpected combination, but together they looked fantastic. "What do you do for a living?" she asked. "Nothing now. Just got out of the Navy," I replied. "Oh, did they check your blood pressure in there?" she asked. "Yeah, it was a little high, but no need to worry. I had a high-pressure job," I said. "And what did you do?" I explained. And then she said, "My blood pressure is 170 over 120, which is too high. I need to have it checked again by my family doctor." Since I didn't have a doctor, she administered the medication the next day. My blood pressure turned out to be normal, and we continued to measure it for a week, getting high, low, and normal readings. She made an appointment for me to go to a military health clinic, where a very experienced doctor explained that I needed to monitor my blood pressure and go on a relaxation or stress reduction program. It's not uncommon. For a while, your body will try to adjust to the absence of the incredible stress you've been experiencing. You can help this by learning to control your stress, he says. I followed the doctor's recommendation and went back to Karen, telling her that I needed her to help me deal with the stress. I'm sure she didn't buy it, but she apparently wanted to date me as much as I wanted to date her. Our first date was at an Italian restaurant that Karen knew from the neighborhood. It was a great little place with homemade food called Citone's. Unfortunately, it had been gone for years. Over dinner, Karen showed her simmering, extroverted personality and wanted to know all about me and what it was like to serve in the Navy. I must have talked for hours, which is rare for me. She has such an impact on people that Karen makes you want to talk to her. An aircraft carrier is the top line of ships. It's a real floating city. The pilots are the princes of the city, and everything is run by the chief petty officers and a handful of officers, I said. Were you one of the officers? She asked. Not really. I've flown airplanes. When they know you can do the job, they leave you alone. I think my problem was that I took it personally. Too much responsibility can be hard, I said. Your blood pressure is definitely an indication of that, she said. I laughed, even though it wasn't very funny. People don't realize that we're losing as many crew members as pilots. It's a very dangerous environment, full of fire, fuel, and explosives. Accidents happen. You just keep praying, but not on my watch. You know that too often you have no choice but to put someone at risk, I said, and she must have seen that I had fallen into melancholy. Well, visiting all those exotic places must have been fun. Did you have a girl in every port? She asked. Now I laughed. No, I'm afraid I'm out of luck when it comes to ladies, I said. Now you're embarrassing me, a handsome man like you, and I'm willing to bet that in your uniform you're worthy of death, she said. But I was out of luck. When we docked in Manila, my shore leave was cancelled to equip the F-14A with a new radar. Again, when we were in Thailand, I was with a beautiful girl in a bar and the place was raided. But worst of all was the girl I had been dating for 6 months in Sydney. I thought we were serious, and one night we were in a club, and this man came up to her and kissed her hard. He then told me to treat my lady well. When I asked her who it was, she said, "That's my husband." "You're very friendly with your ex," I said. "No, he's my current husband. He and I have an understanding. He doesn't mind me dating," she said. So, like I said, I have no luck with women. Then Karen took my hand and just looked at me with her deep brown eyes. After a moment, she said, "Your luck may have changed, sailor, but not today. I'm a 24-year-old girl, and I need to get to know you better," she said. "That's very good, for I'm just like you, and I think I'm very lucky." 3 months later, I was already working at a university and married to the most wonderful woman in the world. We were both inexperienced, but made up for it before we got married. I think we both wanted to make sure there would be no problems. We didn't have a big wedding as none of us had family. We each had a few cousins in distant places, but no one but a few friends could be invited to the wedding. Karen made a deal with me. "I don't want a big wedding, but a house would be nice," she said. We only waited 9 months before we started trying for a baby. During that time, we were house hunting. We found the perfect house for Karen in one of the old industrial towns on the east side of the river, a huge dilapidated row of houses. It was down the hill from the university where I worked and where our firstborn would one day go to school. The neighborhood was far from ideal, the forgotten core of a dying industrial city. Its Victorian houses had been broken up into tiny apartments for students and the elderly, and the riverfront was buried under layers of dead factories. The house was a 4-story brick building with what is called an English basement, which is a floor half above and half below ground. You get to the second floor by a short staircase called a stoop, and under the stoop is a separate front entrance. Presumably, this is where the word stoop comes from, as you have to bend over to enter the lower door. It was a mid-19th century house, with all the Victorian gingerbread charm and all the problems that entails. By the time we moved in, Karen was pregnant. "I'm the luckiest woman in the world," she said, and I believed her. 25 years later, on a Wednesday morning, I was driving Karen to the airport, unaware of how my life would change, or rather, how it had changed without my knowledge. She called that same evening and every day thereafter. Saturday started out clear and bright. I decided to do the yard. I was just entering our basement to switch from a light leaf rake to a heavy iron rake when I heard the doorbell ring. If I was still in the yard, I wouldn't have heard him. If it was raining and I went to see the new Ben Affleck movie, I wouldn't have answered. It rained on Friday, and the leaves got too heavy for light rakes. But Saturday was sunny and clear. Such are the vagaries of weather and the luck of life. It was this fluke that shattered the myth of my happy marriage. One day it rained, the next day it didn't. I crossed our small lobby, opened the outer door, and saw a small Asian woman standing outside. She was even smaller than she looked at first glance. She wore black leather high-heeled boots on her body. The rest of her clothes, from her expensive black suit to her grey silk blouse, were of a darker shade. She seemed to be dressed a little young for her age, which I estimated to be around my 52, but it suited her. She was the kind of woman who retained the look of rare beauty into old age, and she knew it. Something about her appearance reminded her of Karen. They were very different in appearance, but something about the way they held themselves and looked at you was the same. "Can I help you?" said I. "Yes, I'm looking for Karen," she said, holding out a large rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. She held it with her right hand, leaning it against the iron railing of our staircase. "I'm sorry, but she's not home right now." "Would you like to come in and leave a message?" said I. "Oh, sorry, I missed her. I'm Avril Dumonte. I just stopped on my way to New York to drop off her painting," she said, pointing to a package shaped to fit a rather large piece of art. "You must be her husband, Robert. Would you mind helping me with it? "It got a little heavy between my car and your front door," she said, as she crossed the threshold of our house and tried to lift the painting. I took the bag from her and followed her into the house. She seemed to know the layout of the house and headed straight for the large front room. The way she said her name, as if I should have known her, confused me, as did the fact that she obviously knew me and my house. I'd never met anyone with the last name Dumonte or heard them called that. Avril spoke English with a slight but confident French accent. Her accent matched her name, and I reconsidered my first impression of her race. She wasn't entirely Oriental. I sat Avril down on the old-fashioned couch we had inherited from my wife's mother and offered her a refreshment. She asked for tea. "Formosa by how if you still have it. I'm afraid Karen has me addicted to it," she said, naming the expensive tea my wife loved, and kept on hand for guests and special occasions. "No problem," I said, now thoroughly confused as to how this woman knew my wife so well. After serving my guest tea, I settled down across from her in a large leather recliner chair with my coffee. I'd never gotten around to trying Formosa tea. "Please excuse my appearance. I was working in the yard," I said. "No excuses. You're just as ruggedly handsome as Karen described you. Any mistake is mine. I called this morning, remembering that I had to deliver her portrait. I'm on my way to New York to discuss Philip's retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. I left a message on her mail." "But maybe she didn't get it," she said between sips of tea, as if I should have known who Philip was. "She wouldn't be able to come to you. I suppose she's in California now? Or just arrived, since it's early afternoon here and still morning there." "She's visiting our son Oscar," I said. "Oh my God, I should have called sooner. I was so anxious to see her hang it up. I think it's one of Philip's best pieces. It's definitely done with the most love, although a little out of his usual style," she said. I was about to ask her who Philip was, and who she was herself, when she beat me to it, opening the photograph she'd placed beside her on the chair. The brown paper fell with a rustle of wrapping paper that reminded me of the Christmases and birthdays we'd celebrated in this very room. But it should have been a loud scream. I was thrown back against the wings of the chair like a man who sees his life leaving him. The woman in the painting was caught leaning forward to retrieve her pants from the ornate spokeshave-decorated seat of a small, elegant chair. One side of the painting showed a hint of a dressing table. Her golden red hair fluttered around her as if in time with her movements. Gorgeous brown eyes with a golden hue looked out of the painting. She was a true redhead. The light came from the east-facing window at the back of our house, in the bedroom we'd shared for the past 25 years. We had bought this house with the last of my Navy savings and a loan from her state pension. It was a shabby house in a dying section of town that had undergone an amazing renaissance in the intervening time. Our dream home was broken beyond recognition. One of the first things we did was to wallpaper the bedrooms. We bought green and gold striped paper for 30 cents a roll from a store that existed in the old mill town of Cohos at the time. We decorated my future son's room in the style of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. My very pregnant wife and I did everything ourselves. The picture was painted later, after the birth of our second son. Karen still had a small lump in her lower abdomen that persisted for several years after Oscar was born. She eventually got rid of that little bump with yoga and running, but I didn't notice it. The artist didn't miss it, nor the slight smirk that her smile carried. A smile that suggested, "Come here and see what you've got." He was good, maybe even great, I don't know. He drew my wife in the early morning as the sun peeked through our bedroom window against the background of the unmade double bed. She bent over to pick up her pants from her grandmother's dressing table, and I'd seen her do it 1,000 times in this very room. When Avril turned from the picture to me, a satisfied and proud smile appeared on her face, which quickly disappeared. My expression must have said it all. I had no doubt that the picture was of my wife, painted about 20 years ago. How or why, I couldn't say, but any explanation had to involve actions that no faithful wife would engage in. I couldn't believe it. "Oh dear, I thought you knew, for they lived together. They've been lovers for years." "My God, how could you not know?" she said, a concerned frown on her exotic face. "There's some mistake here," I said, grasping at straws. "My wife has lived with me continuously for the last 26 years. This is our bedroom with the wallpaper we glued together. This is our bed that we still sleep on together, I said. I've got to go, she said, rising. No, sit down, I said. You can't spring this on me and then just run away. Who are you? How do you know my wife, me, and for heaven's sake, who Philip is? The story surfaced slowly and reluctantly. Avril's husband, Philippe Dumonte, was an artist and world-renowned restoration expert. In 1989, he was hired to restore 6 paintings that had been vandalized on the South Mall. I remembered the case of a man who fancied himself the reincarnation of Michelangelo and had to fix the paintings. After much searching, the state's General Services Administration hired a Canadian firm to do the restoration. At the time, there was some controversy about hiring out-of-state experts, but the experts were determined. They wanted only the best. Anything less would not satisfy them. Apparently, the choice was Philippe Dumonte. Shortly after Philip started work, an affair began. He met Karen on the South Mall when he was working in the museum building. She was working in the tower building. They were practically in each other's faces. Avril and Philip entered into an open marriage at her insistence. We were young and didn't want to miss anything, but mature enough to understand each other's needs, she said. She was happy he had found someone while he was away. He traveled to and from Montreal, but spent most of his days and nights in Albany for 3 years. Then there was a period beginning in the summer of 1990 when he moved into my house and stayed. Avril visited him on numerous occasions. She knew I was away and still married to Karen, but she never explained the reason. She assumed I knew about their relationship and approved of it. I just assumed she spoke fondly of you and praised you as a husband and father. I realized that Philip moved in with her because you couldn't be with her, and there were such young children, 2 boys who needed a male influence and a single woman. We had 2 girls in their teens who went away to boarding school. Philip spent their vacations with us. Karen spent Christmas 1990 at our home in Mont-Royal. My daughters loved her and the boys as much as I did. How could you not know? All my doubts about her story were dispelled because 1990 was unusual. A monster invaded its oil-rich neighbor and dragged my country and other countries into the war. I foolishly stayed in the Naval Reserve, albeit inactive. I left the Navy as a senior lieutenant, and in the reserves I earned the rank of commander, the result of working in the reserves and on government contracts. My skills were in great demand that August. I was surprised that they waited until Saddam's troops crossed the Kuwait border to engage me. The telegram came on August 6th. I left 2 days later and woke up on August 9th, aboard the Ike. The next 10 months of my life were something of a nightmare, playing out over the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq. The only thing that kept me sane was the belief that I had a loving wife and 2 amazing boys waiting for me at home. They were mine, and I was coming home to them. When an engine caught fire, while flying in a Grumman F-14 Tomcat airplane with me, I knew I would survive because Karen was waiting for me. I was flying aboard the Eisenhower to Saudi Arabia. It was January 16th, 1991, the day before the air battle. I wasn't worried. The pilot and I went through all the procedures to restart the engine. Each attempt failed until we made one last Hail Mary attempt. It shouldn't have worked. The book said it wouldn't, but it did. 6 times I saw people die, sometimes so close that I was in their blood. Ropes failed, airplanes crashed, and more people died in my maintenance crews than pilots. That's a fact of war. Collateral casualties are always the largest in number and the least publicized. Accidents happen when people under tremendous pressure try to do things that should be impossible. We've lifted heavier than airships into the sky and brought them down safely, more often than not. No matter. Karen and the boys were waiting safely at home for me. They spent part of Christmas 1990 in Montreal. Until now, I didn't know why. I remember Kevin talking excitedly about being in an unfamiliar city, and the 2 girls, Simone and Susan, being sisters. No one else was mentioned, and it was incomprehensible to a 6-year-old to communicate over a bad phone connection from the other side of the world. I told Karen I loved her every chance I got, but it was infrequent, and apparently it wasn't enough, although the affair had been going on for a year by the time I left. She loves you with all her heart. Philip was her second man, her little passion, her more experienced lover. She didn't have much experience. As the saying goes, they were in love to be in love. They were friends as well as lovers, she said, looking at me as if that explanation was supposed to mean something. When Philip died 3 months ago of a stroke, she came to his funeral. I asked about you and she said you were doing well. She said the last of the boys had moved out and you and she were happy and still loved each other. I was happy for her even in my grief. I brought the painting as Philip had requested that she have it. I should have realized and given it to her then. She is splendid, isn't she? She said, looking at me for confirmation. I got up and walked forward, looking directly at the evidence of my wife's utter betrayal. It's very beautiful. He captured it better than any photograph. He has her accurate. It's a beautiful picture, and especially that cheating girl in it, I said. Avril gasped. No. You have to understand that it was just beauty, innocent love. Please understand, she begged. I could only shake my head. For half an hour she tried to convince me of something, but I wasn't sure what it was. She didn't dare leave the painting, lest I destroy it. He's very valuable. Please promise me you'll get him safely to Karen, she said. Why not? I won't move her. She's nothing to me now. Avril walked away, continuing to explain and crying quietly. Please talk to Karen. Don't do anything stupid. Don't let it bother you, she said as the door closed behind her, and my life as I knew it. My early morning flight from Chicago arrives at LAX airport right on schedule just after noon. Los Angeles is my least favorite city. At least in that sense, I am a typical New Yorker, even though I was born and raised in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. My husband, Rob, is a true New Yorker. A former Navy sailor, I think he would have withered and died in this desert. I am met at the airport by my son Oscar and his friend Mark. Somehow, I wasn't supposed to know that he wasn't standard and that he and Mark were together. 22 years ago, I gave birth to a chubby little angel, weighing 12 pounds 8 kilograms. Now it's a skinny young man, 6'3", who is bearishly hugging me. He's estranged from his father for reasons I don't understand. Rob loves his son, but there is a growing chasm between them. Men are so often a mystery. What is a woman to do? My Rob is what other men call a man's man. He is big, not just tall. His imposing appearance hides how sensitive Rob is. My husband is hurt by his son's rejection of him. He would never stumble over the truth. I'm convinced that there are no problems in the engine that Rob couldn't spot on a cursory inspection, but there are also no attitude problems that he could see without the help of a trained guide dog. With people, he's hopeless. Except, I gather, with men under duress. Then he becomes the inspiration they follow like sheep to the slaughter. I'm not supposed to know, but I do. In the evening, we go to a club for dinner and dancing. It has a Mexican flavor, but the visitors are a mixed group of mostly Anglo-Saxons and Asians. There are a few couples, both male and female. There are often men and women looking at me. In my 50s, I can still do it. My son and his friend think I am ancient, but I put on a skirt and blouse and intend to dance and have fun. I am married, not dead. It's very flattering to be hit on by younger men at 50. I'm not a fool. I have not been fooled. I've had exactly 2 men in my life, both of whom I loved deeply. Robert MacDonald, my Rob, was my first love and will be my last. Philippe Dumonte was my second, and his recent death hit me hard. We were not true lovers for many years, but we had a deep relationship steeped in love, friendship, and deep gratitude on my part. Philip was there for me when I needed him, and my husband was not. An aggressive man, who I estimate to be in his early 30s, asks me to dance. He is shorter than I am in his low heels, but makes up for it with energy. He is the first of a number of men I dance with. I keep an eye on the time. I want to call Rob. I think my husband went to see the movie Argo starring Ben Affleck. He probably got home a little after midnight his time. At 9:30 Pacific time, I pull away from my current dance partner and find a quiet spot by the door of the women's room to make a phone call. My cell phone is off. I switched it off as I boarded the plane this morning. I'm getting old and forgetful, having never managed to turn it back on. I have one missed call from Avril Dumonte, probably reminding me that Philippe's retrospective exhibition is in the planning stages, and I agreed to help. I call Rob, but the call goes to voicemail. I assume he's still on set, or, like me, forgot to turn his phone on. I call his home phone, and get an answering machine. Rob, I arrived safely. Call me when you get this. 2 hours later, I'm dancing and wondering why my husband hasn't called. We head to Oscar and Mark's condominium, where I fall into a jet lag-induced sleep. Waking up too early, I call Rob again. All I get is voicemail. I call the landline. Rob, you left your phone off. Call me. It's 8 in the morning when a sleepy Mark joins me in the kitchen and offers to make breakfast. I agree if he'll let me help. There's still no call from Rob. Now I'm worried and trying to figure out who I should call. I think back to the call from Avril, and a shiver runs through me. No, that was too long ago. I met Philippe Dumonte at the old state dining room in the South Mall. It wasn't the best place if you like to eat. I had a thermos of good dark tea. I don't drink coffee. I had a cheap novel to read, and a 45-minute lunch break. I could have read at my desk, but you have to get out of the office for at least a little while. I read a trashy novel in hopes of regaining my senses. In 4.5 years of marriage, I'd lost them. When I first married Rob, I couldn't spend a day without his attention, but after my second son was born, they were gone. For the last year, I've been half dead. Why don't they tell you this could happen? I still loved my husband deeply. He is the man you dream of marrying as a little girl. He is my Prince Charming. He has dark coal-black hair and sky-blue eyes. A man who could come out of a fairy tale, but he is so shy and quiet. He's not going through a crisis, but I know he feels deeply. I watch him as he reads to our children. I see him bend down to gently kiss their sleeping heads. He is a man of action and courage with a gentle soul. He is the man I want to have by my side forever. I just didn't want to spend the evenings anymore. At first, I thought it would come back on its own. But as time went on, I became more, not less, afraid of evenings with my sweet, loving husband. I became increasingly desperate. I pretended when the excuses became too much. I feared my husband would soon find out the truth. What kind of woman am I? What kind of woman am I? Excuse me, please. I don't like to eat alone. And since I've been watching you for the past few days, you were alone too. Surely this awful book can't be of such interest, he said. This tall, elegant man, with a distinct French accent in his impeccable English. I learned that his name was Philippe Dumonte, an artist by nature and a restorer by profession. He was a little taller than my husband and thinner, what they call a wallflower. On his head was an unruly mop of black hair, flecked with grey as befitted a man of 42. He was therefore more than 12 years older than I was, but in his brilliant blue eyes there was youth and joie de vivre. His angular face was handsome in the Gallic style. I wouldn't eat that if you knew anything about food, I said as he set down his standard tray of chicken, covered in flat pasta gravy and instant mashed potatoes. In just 2 short weeks, I realized that food is a lost art in your Albany, he said, mimicking well the northern New York accent so influenced by western New England. You're being too harsh. You can find good food here, you just have to know where to look, I said. Perhaps you will be my guide. Perhaps we could have dinner some night, he asked. Sorry, can't. Married, I said, flashing my modest wedding and diamond rings. But let me do something about this drink, I said, substituting bagged tea of unknown content from the cafeteria for the brew from my thermos. Ah, what good tea! And beautiful and plentiful. Surely you can spare an evening for your husband to feed a hungry man, he said. In the end, I agreed. I had little chance against his charm and sophistication. Arranging a supposedly late work evening was not difficult. We had dinner, and by 9 o'clock I was home, and I was alive again. I was eager for a good evening. The first beneficiary was Rob that night, but the man I was in the spirit with was a devastating French-Canadian artist. Philippe was a unique personality that knocked me off my feet as a frustrated wife and mother. It only took Philip 3 weeks to spend a most memorable evening with me in his studio in the museum building next door. There were no extremely late nights. I switched hours at work and we spent the morning or afternoon as we pleased. Sometimes we would see each other in the early evening. He was sympathetic to my situation. His wife Avril had a boyfriend whom he referred to as a suitor or companion. His name was Thomas. Philip said that Thomas was younger and therefore compensated for her attachment to children at a young age. As I lay in Philippe's workshop that first time, curled up in his arms, I felt no guilt. I knew guilt was bound to come later, but in that moment, I was at peace. He understood my problem, seemed to feel it. You will regain your desire for your husband. Relax and enjoy, but remember that your husband should be the first to claim your heart and the right to reclaim you when you are ready, he said. It was a fairly ordinary evening, but he knew more than usual. It's mostly happening in the mind. The mind prompts additional action, and we have to help it, he said. Neither Rob nor I were very experienced in hosting evenings together. Philip showed me and practiced how to do it. He showed me every nuance he could possibly know about. It was an explosion of feelings. That's basically what he taught me. How to participate and help my husband. To be active in the relationship and at the same time sometimes to act, not to be the weak side. Who taught you all this? Avril, I asked. No. I taught her just as you did. My mother organized my education, he said. He told me the story of young Philippe and Colette. She was older, the same age as his mother, and was his mother's friend. By profession, she was a companion. That's what he called a mistress. She went from man to man as a kept woman. She wasn't a nightmare, he said. She just wasn't a woman to marry. I didn't call her one, I said. No, but you thought it was my American housewife. You must understand us, he continued. My parents immigrated from England right after the war. The Germans forced them to flee France for England. My mother was a prominent communist before the war. It was easier for them in Canada, but it was never easy. Dad was a museum curator and art historian. He was, of course, an artistic painter. In Canada, Mom worked as a secretary. Colette was a friend from France. Mom felt that evenings together were a natural occurrence, but should be taken seriously. Colette was invited to be my teacher. She was experienced enough for the task. We had classes with her once a week for a year, he finished with a laugh. And now you're going to teach me? I said. But of course, I'm indebted to Colette, he said with another chuckle, which I was starting to like. The biggest challenge for me was the desire and need to share my new knowledge and skills with my husband. I couldn't just sit Rob down and say, "Listen, honey, I met this wonderful French lover, and he taught me everything we were doing wrong in our relationship and a whole bunch of things we should be doing. But you know I'm not creative, to say the least." "What's this?" said Rob, climbing into bed. "The book," I said. "Yes, but the title of the book is The Joy of Married Couples' Evenings. Is there something you want to tell me?" "Well, since you asked. I haven't been what I should be as a lover since Oscar was born, and I feel like I need to be active here, so I think you and I need to put our heads together. Let me show you a fact I learned from my relationship with Rob," I said. One evening and one weekend after another, we did it all. Everything Philip taught me, I taught my husband. Before we finished, several books were read. I don't think Rob read any of them, and I was only a cursory reader of the syllabus at the time. Philip was right. I regained my feelings for my husband, if only because I am human. However, all good things come to an end. Philip and I had a good year of what he called an amicable relationship, but I felt increasingly guilty and feared that even my trusting husband would realize it sooner or later. I was on the verge of breaking up with Philip. He and I had talked about it. I think he was concerned that he was getting too attached to me. We had deep feelings for each other, but I wasn't going to leave Rob, and he could never leave Avril. It seemed like it was time for us to move on. The catastrophe broke out on August 6, 1990. It had been building up for several days, but it was on that day that the war began. It wasn't our war, but that didn't matter anymore. Eventually, many would be called up, but not before the jet engine specialist still serving in Pupka's reserve. The telegram came on the 7th, and the next 2 days were hell on earth. I had to keep my spirits upbeat. My husband was leaving, and there was nothing I could do about it. A more ignorant woman would have taken comfort in the fact that her husband would be behind the front lines, but I knew the danger he was in. Worse, I had seen firsthand the effects of the incredible stress he had experienced when he first left the Navy. Rob was older, in great physical shape, but that wouldn't have saved him from a stroke. "You have the blood pressure kit I gave you," I said. "Yeah," Rob said. "Promise to use it every day, twice a day, as instructed, and treat if readings are above normal," he said. "Okay, kiss me and your sons goodbye," I said. We were at the airport. Rob was already in uniform. People were staring. Did they know that I was saying goodbye to my husband, perhaps for the last time? Did they realize that this meant I was an only child in an only child marriage, and both of our parents were dead? Did they see the 2 little boys I now had to support? I wanted to say, I have a big old house that we foolishly bought that eats up money and constantly needs repairs. Who's going to pay for the repairs now? Who's going to pay for the extra childcare I'll need? And who's going to read to my boys at bedtime? I don't know how I got home from the airport. I cried before I even got the boys to the car. Kevin noticed. "Why are you crying?" he asked. "I just miss my dad already," I said. "Please don't cry." "There," I said, wiping my eyes with one hand. Already stopped. But I was still terrified and angry. I was angry with the government and with my husband, because I knew that secretly he liked to fight. They were not at war yet, but the planes were taking off and landing incessantly. I drove my shabby Volvo up to the house, and he was sitting on the porch with his suitcase at his feet. "Philip, what are you doing here?" said I. "Did you think I'd leave you when you needed me?" He replied. And so Philippe Dumonte, restorer and artist, became, if anyone asked, my tenant. I had no relatives or very close friends to know otherwise. We lived in the kind of transitional neighborhood where you knew very few neighbors and only for a short time. Philip moved in with me and laid in my bed. He took on all the burdens that I struggled to bear. He became my support in a cruel world. He used to visit Avril on weekends. Now Avril was coming to visit us. Nights he would fall asleep with her, but during the day, she and I could be a couple. She and I became friends, and to this day, it's the strangest relationship I've ever had. For Christmas 1990, I went with the guys to Montreal. We had the best and worst Christmas of my life. The worst was because Rob was in the Gulf, and I hardly heard from him, just one brief phone call on Christmas Day. It was the best Christmas ever, because I felt like I was part of a family. I had my own position, my own place. The Dumonte family gathered in large groups, sometimes up to 40 people, all relatives of Philippe and Avril. I quickly discovered that I had my place there. I was Philippe's companion. In my naivety, I thought they would see me as an outsider or just tolerate me, but I was wrong. They accepted me as a member of the family. They recognized that if I couldn't be with my husband, I would certainly be with Philippe. After all, it was my place. It was that Christmas that the only mistake was made. Philippe decided he wanted a picture of me in his Montreal home, something to remember me by. He began planning the picture and sketching. It was to be a picture of me in the morning. He had an amazing memory for details. When we got back to my house, he started working on the painting. I posed for him. It was a labor of love. He finished the painting in March. It was still 3 months before Rob came home. Philip left 2 days before Rob came home. My affair with Philippe lasted for a year. Rob came home in pain. He wasn't himself, and I was still leaning on Philip. Meanwhile, Avril had broken up with Thomas. She needed Philippe, so he started spending more time in Montreal. When his work on the restoration ended, we both realized it was over, but not done. For the next 12 years, we remained close friends, almost family. I called him at least once every 2 weeks. I organized monthly trips out of town so we could be together. When the stroke took my Philip away, I was distraught. After the funeral, we gathered at the Mount Royal house. Avril, myself, and 3 others. We were all his women. All 5 of us were heartbroken. Avril told me that the others meant much less than I did. "You were his special love," she said. "I know you grieve as I do. Such love is a great rarity." She was determined that his work would get the restoration it deserved. She wanted me to be a part of it. "You were such a part of it. It would be right for you to be a part of it," she said. I promised to do my best. With bated breath, I call Avril. "My friend, I'm afraid I've ruined your marriage," she replies. "What's wrong?" I reply, and start sobbing uncontrollably. We're both crying. "I thought he knew," she says. "No, I never found a way to tell him about it." "He's seen the picture." Oh my God. Mark, who was making elaborate French toast with toppings, stops and walks over to me. "Did someone die?" he asks. "No, just my marriage," I say. Avril tells us what she knows, and then Oscar joins us. He's shocked, and I think Mark is too. "Mom, what do you think Dad will do?" asks Oscar. I have no idea, but I need to talk to him and he's not answering his cell phone, I say. We decide to call Kevin. He tries it and calls us back. No go, he won't pick up the phone. You know, he probably blames me for not telling him about Philippe, he says. He's right, of course. I've drilled into my 6-year-old son that he should never mention Philippe or the Dumontet family. My little boy had my back. Now he'll pay for his childish devotion to his mother. Oscar tries next, but he's already too estranged from his father. Rob has cut himself off from his family, and it's my fault. For the rest of the day, we try to find a plane home for me. Eventually, I manage to book a ticket on a Red Air flight that leaves Monday night and arrives Tuesday morning. At 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, I get home a week early. Rob isn't home. I assume he's at work. I can see that as soon as I walk into the front living room. On my mom's chair is a picture of me that Philippe drew. No one could look at that picture and not know that Philippe Dumontet was my lover. I fall to my knees and start crying. Why is this happening now? I decide that I only have one chance to confess everything and pray that Rob can get over it. I'm not ashamed of what I did, nor am I sorry. I just hate that Rob knows about it and is in so much pain. It's just not fair. None of us did anything wrong. Why do we have to suffer? I decide it's best to make Rob a nice dinner and try to talk. I need to explain the unexplainable. I decide to make macaroni and cheese. I have a special recipe that I developed because it's Rob's favorite dish. I reduce the fat and salt by substituting chicken broth and tomatoes for the cheese and milk. It's not healthy, but it's better for you. I make it rarely as a treat. I try my best. I choose what outfit to wear. The goal is to be attractive, but not too much so. I want to look desirable without assuming I'm easy. I have to make sure Rob realizes that Philip was the only man, and that it wasn't a sordid affair. I was and still am a good woman and wife. By 6:30, I'm sitting in the living room. I put the painting in the hall closet, carefully wrapped in an old blanket. Dinner is prepared. 2 bottles of white wine are chilling in the refrigerator. I'm wearing a pink tea dress that emphasizes my hair. I'm as ready as I've ever been. I can hear Rob on the back stairs. He's not coming in. He's heading straight for the 4th floor apartment. I wait for him to come down, but he doesn't. So much for my plan to meet him in the living room. I take the front stairs to the 4th floor. There's a small landing at the top, and then an interior door with a pretty serious lock. I knock on the inner door. Rob, I'm home, I say, but there's no answer. I hear movement inside. Please, Rob, I've made dinner, mac and cheese. We can eat and talk. Please, Rob, let me at least try to explain, I say in the silence that ensues. I'll wait downstairs, I say before walking away. That night, he doesn't come down. He lives on the 4th floor, and I live in the rest of the house. We don't talk or socialize. Every night I go up and take him out to dinner. This goes on for 2 weeks. Avril calls every day and sympathizes with me. Have you talked yet? She asks. No, I'm getting the silent treatment. Oh God, why doesn't he understand? If only Philip were here. I can hear in her voice how lonely and lost she is. This is an exhibition we're talking about. She is having difficulty dealing with the museum bureaucracy. There are about 600 possible works, but they are in different hands, and acquiring them for the exhibition requires more effort than the museum wants to spend. She needs help, but she insists that I talk to Rob first. On Friday of week 3, I'd had enough. And she was hiding it. Completion of the goddess. Chapter 2. Decisively knocking on the door of the 4th floor apartment, I said, Robert MacDonald, this is your wife, the woman you've been married to for the last 25 years. I am the mother of your 2 sons, and the man who loves you more than his own life. I have always loved you, and always will. But I want to tell you a love story that involves me and someone else. After all we've meant to each other all these years, you need to hear me out. I'll be downstairs with dinner, waiting for me. You can eat and then hear my story, I say through the tightly closed door. About an hour later, he comes down for dinner. I have some expensive steaks and a bottle of good Cabernet. We eat, and then I start. I talk to him from the heart. I don't lie and I don't cover up. Rob's hiding from the truth is over. I met a wonderful man who was there for me when I needed him. First, he helped me in terms of my feelings when I was in a terrible situation, and then he took care of my kids and me when I was alone. I begin. I sat silent while Karen told me the whole story, how she had become dead set against me after the birth of our 2nd son. how she had met Philip, and how he had awakened new feelings in her. She left nothing to the imagination. I remembered the night when, upon coming to bed, I discovered the book, The Joy of a Good Evening, that Karen had brought home. She had told me that after Oscar was born, she wasn't what she could be as a lover and wanted to take the initiative. I now know that this book was just a lie to cover up her affair with Philip. The things she showed and told me were not from that book. They were things that Philip had taught her. Then she told me about how she brought him to our home, the very day she brought me to the airport in 1990. I was then assigned to the USS Eisenhower to serve during Operation Desert Shield, which later became Desert Storm, the war to drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. The only thing that kept me going during that dark time was the knowledge that I had a loving wife and 2 boys at home. Now, 2 decades later, I found out that I didn't, and that fool didn't even have the decency to wait until I was overseas. I now knew why Karen and the boys had spent part of Christmas 1990 in Montreal, and I knew the real reason for her periodic trips there. I should have known this earlier, but I trusted her. I also learned why her relationship with my 2 sons had deteriorated. She had obviously secured their silence and used it to hide the affair from me. I saw the signs when I returned from Iraq, but I didn't catch the connection. Perhaps I had what some call confirmation bias. I would never have thought she was cheating on me, so I dismissed the idea. Apparently, Karen was right that I need a guide dog to handle the relationship. She chattered away, reveling in her connection to Philip, and kept saying it had nothing to do with her feelings for me. Even though the physical part of their relationship had ended years ago, she still felt a strong emotional attachment to him and his family. Her story opened my eyes to many things I had been thinking about all these years. Everything is crystal clear now. As she spoke, I could feel my blood pressure starting to spike. I wanted to strangle her for it, but I knew it would get me nothing but a trip to jail. I listened to her talk as if it were some kind of romantic love story. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong and still considered herself a faithful, loving wife. Finally, she stopped. "It's time to pick up the pieces and get on with our life together," she said. "We can get past this, just like everything else." I stared at her, saying nothing. After what I'd just heard, there wasn't much else to say. "Say something, Rob," she begged. "Please. I still love you. I never stopped loving you." I got up from the chair and slid it back under the table. I stared at her for a few moments before I spoke. "Thanks for dinner," I said quietly. "Good night." I headed back up the stairs to the 4th-floor apartment where I was hiding. "Good night?" she asked. "Is that all you have to say, after I just poured my heart out to you?" I stopped and looked at her. "Bye," I said. "I have a lot to think about." I went back upstairs, closed the door to the apartment, and put a chair against the doorknob to keep her out. I sat on the bed and cried my eyes out. Life as I knew, it was over. My marriage had been a lie for the past 20-plus years, and my wife, the one person I loved more than anyone else, expected me to just accept her years of infidelity. After a while, she knocked on the door. "Rob?" she asked. "Are you okay? We need to talk, honey." Go away," I said. Finally, I fell asleep, but it wasn't easy. The nightmares started again. The F-14 Tomcat I flew to Riyadh the day before Desert Storm started was unruly, and I sensed something was wrong. One moment we were flying at over 20,000 feet at Mach 2, twice the speed of sound. The next moment we were without power and falling fast. The pilot started the restart, but nothing happened. He tried again with the same result. I told him to restart again, but nothing happened. Then I thought about it and told him to turn off the fuel and try again. "It's crazy," he said. "Do it now," commanded I. In reality, the airplane started up and we barely escaped. The problem turned out to be contaminated fuel, and I found out about it quite by accident. We fixed the problem and thus saved several lives. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in my nightmare, and I woke up to the airplane crashing into the water. Could this have something to do with Karen, I thought? The next day, I woke up early and went to work without saying anything to Karen. I was part of a team working on a new jet engine for the military. The university I was working at had received a 1-year grant to develop a next-generation engine to be installed in some of the newest aircraft being developed. If successful, the new engine could theoretically propel an airplane into orbit. Lisa, one of my assistants, took me aside during lunch and spoke to me. "All right, Rob," she said. "Spit it out. What's going on with you?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "Bullshit, Rob," she said defiantly. "I've been working with you too long. Something's been eating at you. What's going on?" She was onto me, and I knew it, so I told her the whole story. "Oh my God," she said when I was done. "No wonder you've been like a zombie for the last couple weeks. What are you going to do?" I shook my head. "I don't know," I said. She said the physical part of their affair ended some time ago, but she's still emotionally attached to him even though he's dead. Part of me wants to divorce her and move on, but another part of me says otherwise. At the end of the day, I still love her. God damn it, I hate it. What would you do? If I were her, I'd throw her out the door as soon as she admitted it, Lisa said. But that's just me. You need to pull your head out of your ass and deal with it. Stop analyzing it like a jet engine and deal with it. Do you think that's what I'm doing? I asked. Overanalyzing the situation? Of course, she said. You always do, but it's not something you can break down into a series of equations. What does your intuition tell you? When you realize that, get over it and move on with your life. She stood up and tossed the trash. Feel free to talk to me anytime, Rob, but do something, and fast. We need you back in the game. She walked away, leaving me with my thoughts. Lisa was right, and I knew it. I worked late that day, mostly to avoid going home. I ate a small piece of meatloaf I had brought from home and continued to mull over everything Karen had told me. Finally, around 11 p.m., I headed home. When I entered the house, I saw Karen and Avril sitting on the couch. It's about time you came home, Karen said. I've been busy, I said as I walked up the stairs to my apartment. Avril will be staying with us this week to work on the exhibition, Karen said. She had told me the night before that they were planning to organize an exhibition of Philip's work in one of the major art galleries in the city. The exhibition was to start early next year, and they planned to take it around the world. Never mind, I said. And just so you know, we intend to make my portrait the centerpiece of the exhibit, she said. I stopped and looked down at her. What? I asked. Not only have you been tumbling around with that asshole while I'm at war, in front of our kids no less, but now you're going to rub my nose in it by showing this thing to the world? It's a beautiful job, Avril said. Your wife is a beautiful woman, isn't she? You should be proud to show her off to the world. I shook my head. Proud? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I could feel my blood pressure starting to skyrocket. I'm supposed to be proud that my wife was with another man in my bed with my children in the next hallway? And now I'm supposed to be proud to let her wipe my nose with her infidelity for the whole world to see? Are you out of your mind? Please, Rob, Karen began. Get away from me, both of you, I said. You're making me sick. Just leave me alone. Please don't get upset, Avril begged as I made my way upstairs. I had heard enough and didn't want to hear any more from either of them. I closed the door to my apartment, locked it, and placed my chair on the doorknob. The women came upstairs following me and tried to talk to me through the door. Rob, Karen begged, please come out and talk to us. Please? What part of leave me alone don't you understand? I asked. Rob, let's love the pain and the hurt, Avril said. Get out, damn it, I shouted, feeling the pain in my chest. I heard them walk away, crying softly. I rarely swore, and I always tried not to swear in front of Karen, so I knew my outburst had upset her. Too bad, I thought. I sat down on the bed and took deep breaths, hoping to ease the pain. After a few minutes, the physical pain subsided a little, but the emotional pain was still there. I lay back on the bed, still in my clothes, and thought about my options. Divorce was my first option, even though I didn't want to think about it. I knew that New York was a no-fault state, and I also knew that the marital property would be divided equally. I decided that if it came to that, I would give Karen the house since it no longer meant anything to me after she was with Philip in our bedroom while I was overseas. All the years spent rebuilding the place had gone to waste, but I had to make Karen realize exactly what she had done to me. In her mind, she was completely right and felt no guilt about being with Philip. And then it hit me. In the back of the closet was still lying my old 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. I went and found it, still in the case I had stored it in. It had been sitting there idle for the better part of a decade. I pulled it out along with a box of ammo. It was still shiny from the last time I oiled it. I checked the operation of the pump gun and found that it still worked well, so I sat down and thought about the next action. For a moment, I considered blowing my brains out. In my mind, thanks to Karen, I was already a dead man walking. I dismissed the thought, however, as I had always considered suicide a cowardly act. Sure, I could have done it to Karen, but that would have put me behind bars, and I had no desire to be caged for the rest of my life. And then it hit me. The picture, the one that Karen and Avril loved so much, the picture he drew. The asshole who had wormed his way into Karen's heart with his clever, seductive ways. Thankfully, Karen had had the good sense to put that abomination away in a faraway closet, but it was still there, taunting me. And now Karen planned to make a fool of me in front of the world with this thing. That would be my goal. I loaded the shotgun and listened to make sure both women were asleep. Hearing nothing, I went down the stairs and made my way to the back pantry. Opening the door, I saw her leaning against the back wall and covered with a blanket. I lifted the blanket and took one last look at it. Yes, Karen was beautiful in the picture, I thought. As I'd said to Avril when she'd first shown it to me, a beautiful fool. But it was clear that Karen's smile was meant for her lover, not me. My anger was building, and with it, the pressure. I fired the first round, and aiming carefully, blew a hole right through the image of her face. I kept pumping rounds into the chamber and firing, destroying the rest of her image piece by piece. 2 women were already in the hallway, yelling for me to stop, but I ignored them. By the time I ran out of ammo, her image was completely gone from the picture. I tossed the empty gun to the floor and began punching the portrait, ripping it out of the frame, which I somehow managed to shatter. Despite the infernal pain in my chest, I picked up the pieces and headed for the big gas fireplace in the front room, Karen and Avril trailing behind me. While the women sobbed and yelled for me to stop, I threw the destroyed portrait into the fireplace and flicked the switch, starting the fire. The canvas immediately caught fire, and I stepped aside to admire my work. I pulled on my wedding ring and managed to remove it. I threw the ring into the fireplace, but it bounced off the brickwork and fell somewhere in the living room. I didn't care where it hit. I turned to see Karen and Avril sobbing uncontrollably, but their cries went unheeded. I wanted to say, "Now you know how I feel," but I couldn't say a word. My vision blurred and pain shot up my left arm. I began to feel nauseous and I struggled to catch my breath. As I fell to the floor, I silently prayed for death to take me out of this hell. When I woke up, I saw a man in a doctor's coat standing over me with a clipboard in his hands. He looked down at me and smiled. "Mr. MacDonald, it's good to see you back with us," he said. "We almost lost you a few times." I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry and my lips felt glued together. Also, my back hurt like hell. "It's okay," the doctor said. "Just relax. Don't try to talk yet." He pointed to someone out of my field of vision, and I fell asleep again. When I woke up later, I found a nurse in my room. I got her attention and tried to explain that my mouth was dry. She gave me a crumb of ice to suck on, and I was finally able to say something. "My chest hurts like hell," I tried to say. She nodded her head, letting me know she understood what I meant. "It's all right, Mr. MacDonald," she said. "They gave you CPR, so your chest will be sore for a while." She gave me another ice chip, and I savored it as long as I could. She put something into my IV, and I started to drift off to sleep again. When I woke up, I found the doctor back in the room checking my vitals. Karen and Avril were also in the room, sitting on a couch under a window that overlooked the city. The doctor examined me before he spoke. "How are you feeling, Mr. MacDonald?" he asked. "My chest hurts like hell," I said, sucking on an ice chip and trying to moisten the inside of my mouth. The doctor nodded his head. "That's normal," he said. The paramedics had to give you CPR and hit you several times with a defibrillator. Your chest may hurt for a while. He checked my blood pressure and pulse before sitting down next to me. How are you doing? What do you mean? Asked I. To begin with, we didn't find any signs of blockage, he said. But we did notice that your heart had changed shape. He displayed an X-ray image on the viewing device in the room, then placed another next to it. He pointed to the second image. This is an X-ray of a normal heart, he said. And this one is yours, he added, pointing to the second one. I had to admit that they looked quite different. Mine resembled something like a pot lying on its side, one half of which was bulging. I've read about it, and frankly, I've only seen it in a few patients, he said. It's called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, or a weakening of the heart's main pumping chamber that usually results from severe emotional or physical stress. It's also called broken heart syndrome. Tell me, Mr. MacDonald, has anything extremely stressful happened in your life recently? Perhaps the loss of a loved one? Karen started sobbing when the doctor said this. He looked at her for a moment, then back at me. Perhaps I should ask one of our counselors to speak with you, he said. Is he going to be okay, doctor? Tearfully asked Karen. With proper treatment, I think so, Mrs. MacDonald, said the doctor. However, his recovery may take a couple months. We've prescribed some medications, beta blockers and aspirin, and we'll see how well he responds to them. We'll know more when a psychologist talks to him. In the meantime, I suggest you do what you can to reduce his stress level. Thank you, doctor, she said as he left the room. After the doctor left, Karen and Avril walked over to me. I looked at Karen before I spoke. Why? Wheezed I. I already told you why I fell in love with Philip, she said. I shook my head and waved my hand, dismissing her words. No, I said. Why did you let me live? Her face turned white. You already killed me. You should have just let me die. Both women started crying again. Please, just go away, I said. You've hurt me enough. Please don't say that, Rob, Karen said through tears. Don't you know how much I love you? I'm going to die without you. I'll come back, Rob, and I promise I'll make things right. Please don't hate me. By this time, one of the nurses had entered the room, accompanied by another woman dressed in a medical gown. The nurse escorted Karen and Avril out of the room and closed the door, leaving me alone with the other woman. She pulled a chair over to my bed and sat down. My name is June, Mr. MacDonald, she said. Dr. June Carstairs. I've been asked to come talk to you to find out what's causing your heart problems. Do you mind if I record this conversation? Not at all, I said. Thank you, she said, starting the tape with an introduction. Please tell me about yourself. I told her my life story in Reader's Digest format, and what little I could tell her about my work at the university. So stress is a normal part of your job, she said. I understand that. What about your home life? I told her everything. About how Avril had come in with a portrait and dropped a nuclear bomb on what I thought was a relatively secure marriage. I also relayed to her, as best I could, what Karen had told me about her relationship with Philippe Dumonte. She listened in silence, taking notes as I told her, pausing only a few times to ask clarifying questions. I also told her how Karen had planned to use the painting to show me her infidelity. And that led to the shotgun incident? She asked. I nodded my head. Yes, I said. I see, she replied. She asked me a few more questions and wrote down my answers. I'll need to talk to your wife before I write up a report with recommendations for Dr. Allen, she added. In the meantime, you need to get some rest. If you feel the need to talk, just ask one of the nurses, okay? I nodded my head again. Thank you, I said, feeling devastated. After she left, I fell asleep. The next day, Dr. Allen said I could be moved from the ICU to a private room. I let the nurses and orderlies do their thing, and was soon lying on a real bed in a small but well-furnished room. It felt good to be away from the ICU, and I found I could relax. I didn't see Karen or Avril that day, but Lisa and a few other people from the university came to visit me. Lisa brought me a paper airplane, thinking it would cheer me up. I smiled at the gift, even though I really hate airplanes. Oh well, I said to myself, it's the thought that counts. After eating a black bean burger, The hospital insisted that I follow their cardiac diet to the letter. I watched a little TV and dozed off. And now, back to our Karen. The last 3 days have been a blur. It all started the night Rob had his heart attack. Avril and I had just fallen asleep when we heard the first shotgun blast downstairs. The security system didn't go off, so the only thing I could think of was that Rob had decided to kill himself. The first explosion was followed by another, then another, and another. What was Rob doing? I asked myself. Avril and I ran downstairs and saw Rob at the hall closet. He was shooting my portrait. Avril and I yelled at him to stop, but he paid no attention to us and continued to rain bullets down on the painting. With our hands over our ears, we watched as he methodically destroyed my image on the portrait. He ran out of ammunition, so he threw the gun to the floor and started kicking the frame, tearing it with his hands and feet. When he finished, he picked up the pieces and ran to the front room. We followed him, begging him to stop, but he was like a man possessed. We watched in horror as he threw the pieces into the fireplace and started the fire. We sobbed uncontrollably as we watched the beautiful portrait Philip had created turn to ashes. Then Rob took off his wedding ring and threw it as hard as he could into the fireplace. I saw it bounce off the brickwork and I memorized where it was so I could return it later. He turned to face us and seemed about to say something, but then fell unconscious. I quickly grabbed my phone to dial 911 while Avril tried to put out the fire, but it was too late. The portrait was completely destroyed. The ambulance arrived in record time. While I watched, they performed CPR and transferred him to a gurney. They told me which hospital they would take him to and left. Avril and I quickly got dressed and headed to the emergency room. We were told that Rob had had a heart attack and the doctors were working on him. We waited for what seemed like an eternity before a doctor came out to see us. "Mrs. MacDonald?" he asked. I nodded my head, and he directed me to a small room next to the waiting room. "Your husband suffers from something called cardiomyopathy. We almost lost him a few times, but we were able to revive him. He's been taken to the CICU, our cardiac intensive care unit. As soon as his condition stabilizes, a nurse will come for you." "Is he going to be okay?" I asked. "We're doing everything we can for him," the doctor said. I sat down and cried. Had I really done this to him? Had I taken him too far and expected him to take more than he was capable of? I'd never seen Rob on a rampage before, and I certainly didn't think he was capable of something like shooting my portrait. Avril held my head while I cried, but didn't say anything. Several hours passed before a nurse came out and escorted us to the emergency room. When I looked in there, everyone seemed to know that my cheating had put my husband in the hospital. No one said anything, but the accusatory looks I was getting stung my soul. I almost lost my senses the first time I saw him. He looked about 10 years older, his eyes sunken, his skin a sickly grey shade. We sat and looked at the monitors, hoping he was still with us. As we sat there, nurses came in to check his vitals and adjust his medications. A few times, we dozed off, and one of the nurses suggested we leave and come back in a few hours, but I refused. There is no way I would leave my husband when he needed me the most, at least not anymore. Avril and I took turns, one sleeping, and the other watching and waiting. We had been there for about 30 hours when Dr. Allen and a nurse came in. He talked to Rob for a while and then brought up some x-rays on the screen. He explained that Rob had suffered something called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. I've heard of it before. The name came from a pot that Japanese fishermen used to catch octopus. It was a condition caused by extreme emotional tension or stress. I almost died when Dr. Allen asked if anything extremely stressful had happened recently. I cried when he asked Rob if he had lost a loved one. Yes, I thought, it was me. I did this to him. Avril hugged me while I sobbed. I asked the doctor if he would be okay and was told that with proper treatment and stress reduction, he should get better, but it could take months. He also said that Rob would be talked to by a psychologist. That was a good idea, I thought. Maybe a psychologist could help Rob deal with his resentment. I thanked the doctor as he left. Avril and I walked over to Rob. As I looked into his face, I saw a sadness I had never seen before. I was surprised when he asked me, "Why?" I thought he wanted to know why I had fallen in love with Philip, but he waved his hand and shook his head. "No," he said. "Why did you let me live?" I was shaken to the core. "You already killed me. You should have just let me die," he said. We both started crying again. "Please just go away," he said. "You've hurt me enough." "Please don't say that, Rob," I said through my tears. "Don't you know how much I love you? I'm going to die without you. I'll come back, Rob, and I promise I'll make things right. Please don't hate me." I meant what I said, but I wondered how I could make it up to him. How could I make him realize that I needed him? For the first time, I truly began to realize what my involvement with Philip had done to him, and I felt awful. Oh my God, I thought to myself, I had done this to him. A nurse returned to the room with another woman and escorted Avril and me out, suggesting that we go home and come back the next day. I was in no condition to drive, so Avril drove us home. We showered, ate, and then went to bed, physically and mentally exhausted. Avril was so sweet, so supportive of me. I truly felt lucky to have her in my life at that moment. We lay in each other's arms and fell asleep. I dreamed that I was standing in a circle of light. I looked around, but at first I saw no one. Then several large disembodied heads appeared in my field of vision. I recognized them from the pictures Rob had shown me. They were members of his family. I recognized his father, mother, and some other family members. They looked down at me angrily, disapprovingly. The face that belonged to his father spoke. "You killed him, Karen," the face said. I shook my head. "No," I said. "You don't understand. What Philip and I had was beautiful." "No," Father Face said. "You broke his heart. He loved you with everything he had. He trusted you. And what did you do?" "Please," I begged. "I needed Philip. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly well," Father Face said. "Your husband almost died in that war, but that wasn't enough for you, was it? You plotted, deceived, and deliberately broke his heart. You brought this man into your home. You brought him into your bed. You turned his children against him. You destroyed everything he held dear. You killed him." "No," I begged, crying. "Please try to understand." "You're guilty," said the Father Face, looking at her angrily. "Guilty," the other faces said in unison. "Guilty, guilty." I woke up in surprise to find Avril lying next to me, her eyes open. "Shh," she whispered, pulling me tight against her. "It was just a bad dream. It wasn't real. Go back to sleep." She hugged me as I cried myself to sleep. No matter what she or anyone else said, deep down I knew those faces were right. I was guilty, and a good man almost died because of me. The next morning I got up, showered, got dressed, and went downstairs. Avril was already up and had made us breakfast. I poured myself a cup of coffee and ate mindlessly. We talked about the exhibition afterward, but my heart didn't lie with her. All I could think about was the look I'd seen on Rob's face the day before. "Your portrait is destroyed," Avril said. "It was supposed to be the centerpiece of our exhibition. What are we going to do now?" I shook my head. "I don't know," I said. "We'll figure something out." Fortunately, our conversation was interrupted by a phone call. It was Dr. Carstairs, and she wanted to talk to me that morning about the events leading up to Rob's heart attack. "We need to get back to the hospital," I told Avril after Dr. Carstairs ended the conversation. "Why?" she asked. "They want to talk to me about what happened," I said as I went upstairs to change. An hour later, we pulled into the hospital parking lot and went to Dr. Carstairs' office. Dr. Carstairs said she wanted to talk to me alone first, so Avril sat back down in the waiting room. "I want to discuss the events that led to the incident with your husband," she told me as she closed the door. "Do you mind if I record our interview?" I shook my head and watched as she pulled out a digital audio recorder and made some notes. When it was ready, she looked up at me. "Please," she said. "Start from the beginning." I told her just as I had told Rob how I'd met Philip and how he'd awakened my sensuality. I told her how I'd brought Philip to our house the day Rob left for war, and I left nothing out. I even told her about the events surrounding the painting that Rob had destroyed and how I traveled to Montreal periodically to see my lover. I also told her about how I had persuaded the boys to keep my life with Philip a secret from their father. Dr. Carstairs was very professional and took notes as I spoke. She would make a great poker player, I thought. She showed no emotion as I spoke and refused to do or say anything to indicate approval or disapproval of my actions. She didn't say anything until I was done. So, do you feel remorse or guilt for your actions? She asked. Not at first, I said. I was still a good wife and mother. I see, she said, jotting something down in her notes. And how did you expect your husband to react to your affair? I was hoping he could put it behind him, I said. I thought that after the first of the year we could go to counseling, and he could forget about it and move on with his life. After all, Philip is dead. So, just so I understand, she said, you've been physically and emotionally involved with another man for decades, even brought him into the marital bed while your husband was overseas and at war, and you expected your husband to just brush it off as if nothing had happened. Is that true? The way she was explaining it seemed so vile, but essentially she was right. What else could I say? Well, I began, that's roughly how I envisioned it. Has your husband shown violent tendencies before? The doctor asked. I shook my head. No, never, I said. Rob is somewhat shy and introverted. He tends to keep things to himself until he's analyzed everything in his mind. I've never seen him lose his temper. You mentioned the first number, said the doctor. Why wait for a consultation? Is there anything special about the first number of the year? Avril Dumonte, Philippe's wife, and I are putting together an exhibition of his work, I said. The portrait that Rob destroyed was to be the centerpiece of the exhibit. I thought we could forget about the past until after the exhibition. I see, said Dr. Carstairs. And you intended to flaunt the very picture that proves your infidelity to the world. Is that so? Mostly, I said, feeling ashamed. She said, making a note in her notebook. How would you describe your husband's relationship with your children? She asked. Probably like most fathers and sons, I said. They're a little strained right now. Rob doesn't talk to them much. Did you persuade them to keep your affair quiet? The doctor asked. Yes, I said quietly. And you don't think it might have affected their relationship? I didn't think it would work out that way at the time, I said. And now? The doctor asked. I don't know, I said. One last thing, Mrs. MacDonald, said the doctor. If it were all over again, what would you do? Honestly? I asked. I don't know. I think under the same circumstances, I'd probably do it all over again. Even knowing what it could do to your husband? She asked. I had to think about it. You must have known Philip, I said. I see, she said. So my husband is going to be okay? I asked. You'll have to talk to his doctor, she said. Can I go to him now? I asked. She shrugged. Sure, if that's what you really want, she said. I told her what I wanted and left her office as fast as I could. I could feel her gaze burning into the back of my head as I left. I grabbed Avril and we went to Rob's room. Back to Rob. After a sound sleep, I woke up to one of the hospital staff bringing me breakfast. I ate it and was immediately surrounded by another nurse who took my vitals and took me to X-ray for my daily checkup. After I returned, another nurse was waiting to walk me around the room. The doctor said he wanted me to walk around the room at least twice a day to build up my strength. I was back in the room and in bed when Karen and Avril showed up. How are you feeling? Asked Karen, walking over to my bed. Not as shitty as yesterday, I said. You look better than you did yesterday, she said, kissing my cheek. That's good, I think, I said. Sure, that's good, she said. I need you to come home as soon as possible. I miss you, you know that. I'm sure, I said in a neutral tone. She looked at me, shocked. It's true, she said. I love you and I miss you. I know you probably don't believe me, but it's the truth. You're right, I said. I don't believe you, but I'm still grateful for those feelings. Avril walked over to my bed, angry. How can you say that to your wife? She asked. She cried all night because of you. Because of me? I asked. Please don't insult my intelligence. I wouldn't dare do such a thing, she said. But I have to wonder why you would want to destroy such a beautiful masterpiece. You mean that painting? I asked. Of course, she said. It wasn't a masterpiece, I said. It was just a picture of a beautiful fool painted by her lover to be a constant reminder of her infidelity. The real masterpiece is what Karen and I had before she met your husband. The two of them destroyed that masterpiece, and from what I understand, you helped them. As did the rest of your family, along with my 2 sons. Please don't talk about your wife like that, Avril said, as Karen wiped her eyes. Look at her, she still loves you. Can't you put aside your stupid pride and let her love you? You don't understand, Mrs. Dumonte, I said, deliberately using her married last name. It takes more than love to make a marriage strong. It takes commitment, loyalty, and trust. Karen and I made a solemn vow before God and everyone else to leave everyone else behind until death do us part. I kept my end of the bargain. She didn't. Worse, she lied to me for 2 decades. That may mean nothing to you, but it means everything to me, and Karen knew it. You talk about it like that, Avril said. Because it was, I said in response. You can't forgive your wife's mistake? She asked. A mistake? I asked. A mistake is accidentally leaving milk on the counter overnight, or turning right instead of turning left. What she did goes beyond a simple mistake. She betrayed me in the worst way a woman could. She made a mockery of our marriage. Then she lied to me for 20 years to cover it up, and made our children lie for her. Besides, she doesn't think she did anything wrong. How can I forgive someone who thinks she's as pure as snow in the wind? I shifted my gaze to Karen. Tell me something, dear wife, I said. What would you do if the roles were reversed? Suppose you came home one day and found on the doorstep a portrait of a woman you'd never seen, and found out that I'd been with her for 20 years. Would you just forget about it and expect us to go on with our lives as if nothing had happened? Honestly. You're right, Rob, she said. Honestly, I don't think I could ever forgive you for that. But that's exactly what you want me to do, I said. Let's take it a step further. Suppose I tell you that I want to put this portrait on public display to showcase the woman I cheated on you with. Would you agree to that? No, of course not, she said. And let's just pretend I asked the boys to keep this little affair a secret from you, I said. Would you be okay with that? Hell no, she said. While we're on the subject, let's just say that this woman's family came by and tried to tell you that it's wonderful that I found this amazing woman who helped me in my time of need and suggested that you just suck it up and deal with it, I said. Are you willing to do that? You know that's not true, Rob, she said. But that's exactly what you expect me to do, I said. So, to break it down, what you're saying is that there's one set of rules for you and a different set of rules for me? Isn't that the truth? Please, Karen, be honest with me for once, if you can. Okay, Rob, Karen said with irritation in her voice. You've made your point. Do we have any way forward at all? I honestly don't know, Karen, I said. Will you be able to redraw the last 20 years? Will you be able to prove to me that I can trust you or believe you again? She never had time to answer that question before there was a knock on the door. Hello? A man's voice rang out. May I come in? Come in, I said. Admiral Dan Dickerson poked his head through the door and walked in. The last time I'd seen him was in 1992 when the Ike was headed to Norfolk for maintenance. He was a lieutenant captain at the time. With him were 2 junior officers, Commander Jack Marlowe and Lieutenant Allison Patrick. Something told me that these men were about as military as our pet cat, but I said nothing. Long time no see, Dan, I said, shaking his hand. You're looking good. What brings you to these parts? We stopped by to see how things were going with the project, and of course, we were worried about you, he said. How are you doing these days? I've had better, I said. By the way, let me introduce you to my wife, Karen, and Avril Dumonte. They shook hands and talked for a while, with Dan telling the ladies sea stories about my time on the Eisenhower. Although I enjoyed the visit, I suspected an ulterior motive. I appreciate you stopping by, Dan, I said, but I have a feeling there's something else going on. What's the problem? Actually, Professor, it is, Lieutenant Patrick said, looking at the 2 women in the room with me. Would you care to enlighten me? I asked. Of course, Lieutenant Patrick said. It has come to our attention that there is a potential security threat, and that could jeopardize this project. She turned to Karen. For example, your wife had a long-term affair with a foreign national with a reputation as a womanizer. She turned to Avril before continuing. Who, by the way, was married to an avowed communist. The kind of scandal a hostile foreign power might use to blackmail the head of a project like yours. Both Karen and Avril looked down at the floor. You're not suggesting, I began. Dan raised his hand. Nobody's implying anything, Rob, he said. I know you. I know what kind of man you are. It's just the kind of thing that gets tongues moving. Next thing you know, there are calls for a congressional investigation, and you know what can come out of that. Under normal circumstances, we would have to suspend the project until a full risk assessment is completed, Commander Marlowe said. Which, of course, includes a full psychological profile of the team leader who has just suffered a serious medical problem related to his marriage. I knew what that meant, but it could take months, I said, looking at Dan. I know, he said. That's another reason we stopped by today. We stopped by the field house to check on things, and as far as the Pentagon is concerned, you and your team have accomplished your contracted tasks, ahead of schedule and ahead of budget. Don't worry, you and your team will be paid in full, so consider this an early Christmas present. I knew what that meant. The project was no longer in my hands. It would now be completed by military engineers. Lisa, the rest of the team and I were officially out of a job, another victim of Karen's infidelity. I see, I said. Then I guess you'll need my laptop and access card. Dan nodded his head. Yes, I will, he said. You can pick it up from the house any time, I said. Karen knows where I keep my laptop bag. Dan looked at Karen. We'll be home this afternoon, she said. You're welcome to come by any time. Thank you, Mrs. McDonald. I appreciate it. Dan turned to me. Rob, you did a great job as always, he said. I'm sure we'll be in touch again soon. Get well, you hear? I will, Dan, thank you, I said. They left after shaking our hands and saying goodbye. I waited until the door closed behind them before I said anything. Well, Karen, I said. Do you want to mess up anything else? Rob, I'm so sorry, she said. I had no idea this could happen. I hope you realize that if it had been someone else and not Dan, this whole thing could have been a national scandal, I said. A lot of people have lost their jobs over this. Karen looked like she was about to say something else, but then there was a knock on the door. Dr. Allen poked his head inside before he entered. How are you feeling today, Mr. McDonald? He asked. Better than yesterday, Doc. Thanks, I said. Good, he said. I just wanted to let you know that your tests show improvement, and if all goes well, we'll have you out of here in a day or two. So he's coming home? Asked Karen. No, I'm afraid not, Dr. Allen said. I've read Dr. Carsters' report, and I agree with her opinion that Mr. McDonald needs rehabilitation in a relatively quiet environment. Everything is in place, and we're just waiting for a room to become available. How long will he be there? She asked. It's hard to say, Dr. Allen said. At least a month. It all depends on how his body responds to the therapy. The most important thing in his recovery is to keep his stress level as low as possible. I hope you understand me. I understand, she said quietly. Dr. Allen said goodbye and left. Karen walked over to me. Rob, do you think we'll ever be okay? She asked. I don't know, Karen, I said. There's too much destruction, and I keep wondering what's going to happen next. And she was hiding it. Completion of the goddess. Chapter 3. You would be a fool to reject your wife's love, Avril said. Karen raised her hand before Avril could say anything else. Leave him alone, she said. You heard the doctor. He needs to lower his stress level. I know my Rob. He'll analyze this like he does everything else. He'll make the right decision. I hope you're right, Avril said. Karen kissed my cheek. We'll be back, she said. For a moment, I imagined the Terminator making the same announcement. I smiled to myself, nodding my head. I'll be here, I said. Just do me a favor and bring my laptop when they're done with it, please. I will, she said. They left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Karen was right about one thing. I would analyze the situation, and very carefully. But I had already made up my mind about the end result. An hour or so later, Lisa peeked into my room and filled me in on the day's events. I take it you've heard about the project, she said. Yeah, I said. What happened? The Admiral and 2 of his handmaidens came out when we were already starting to build momentum, she said. They wanted to see if we could start the engine. As it happened, we were in position, and we started it. Believe it or not, it fired right up, and before we knew it, the thrust was over 90,000 pounds. It sucked a little more fuel than we would have liked, but they said it wasn't a problem. They then thanked us for our work, said we did a good job, and announced that their engineers would take it from there. They took our badges, wiped down our laptops, and left. They didn't say anything else? I asked. She shook her head. No, she said. But I had a feeling something else was going on. It was, I said. Karen? She asked. I nodded my head. Yeah, I said. We dodged a bullet, you know. If someone other than Admiral Dickerson had gotten involved, we could have gotten answers to a lot of uncomfortable questions from some very nosy members of Congress, and lose our security clearance. I'm just sorry you and the others lost your jobs. Don't worry about it, boss, she said. It was bound to end sooner or later. Have you decided what you're going to do about Karen yet? Yeah, I said. I just need to get more information about this Dumonte character. I keep thinking there's more to it all than what I've been told so far. Just don't analyze it too much, Rob, she said. It's not an engine. You know that. Do what you need to do and move on. Good advice, I said. She got up to leave. You know, Rob, she said, if I ever decided to change sides, you'd be the man I'd want to hold on to. It was well known in the group that Lisa preferred women to men. Thank you, Lisa, I said. It means a lot to me, it really does, and thank you for your support. She smiled and kissed my cheek. Anytime, she said. Hopefully we'll work together again someday. Me too, I said. I watched her walk away and then lay back on the bed. I was just about to fall asleep when the nurse came back for my medication and a walker. When I returned, they were already bringing me my evening meal. By the time I was done, Karen was back with my laptop. Here's your laptop, she said. They took everything they needed off it. Thank you, I said, placing the machine on the tray. Rob, she said quietly. I looked at her. Are you really going to throw away 26 years of marriage? That's the problem, I said. I'm not sure we've been a married couple for the last 20 years or so. From my perspective, you've been Philip's de facto wife all that time. I was in the house with you, and we were legally married, but he owned your heart the whole time. In fact, he still does. But there's something I don't understand. What is it? She asked. You have no remorse for what you did, I said. And you described the affair as something beautiful and innocent. If it was as beautiful and pure as you say it was, why did you find it necessary to hide it from me all these years? I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. So you admit it will hurt me. That's interesting. But you had to know I'd find out one way or another, I said. I was hoping it wouldn't happen for many more years, she said. Tell me something, I said. What? She asked. When you were with him, did you ever want to be with me? I asked. I always hoped all 3 of us could be together, she said. But you never wanted me there instead of him? I asked. She lowered her eyes and shook her head. No, she said quietly. And when you were with me, I assume you were only thinking about him, I said. She nodded her head, saying nothing. I see, I said. In other words, he's taken my place in your heart. I've noticed something else. You and Avril seem very close. What's going on with that? You two. She smiled and nodded her head. We've become very close, she said quietly, emphasizing the word very. That explained a lot. Not only was she doing all this with Philip, she was also doing something with Avril. We were actually hoping you'd join us at some point. And the hits keep coming, I said. For how long? For quite some time now, she said. She likes you very much, you know. Don't you find her attractive? I want to, I said. There's just one problem, I added, lifting my ring finger. The ring was gone, but the indentation it had left in my finger was still there. I'm still somewhat married, and as you know, I'm strictly a one-woman man. I know. Look, Rob, I'm sorry I hurt you, she said. I never meant to, I nodded my head. I'm starting to get a little tired, I said. She took the hint and got up to leave. Please believe me when I say I love you, she said, kissing my cheek. I nodded my head again. not saying anything. She walked out of the room, wiping her eyes. The next day, I was transferred to the rehabilitation center at the hospital. My new room was much bigger than the one I had been in at the hospital, and it had more amenities. For starters, the bed was bigger and more comfortable. It had a small refrigerator and a huge TV mounted on the wall. The ward also had great Wi-Fi, so I was able to use my laptop. I was put on a strict diet and exercise that was supposed to restore my strength. When I wasn't exercising, walking, or in counseling, I was sitting at my laptop studying Philippe Dumonte. I understood why Karen's affair with him was seen as a potential security threat. It seems that Philip was quite a ladies' man. He had been responsible for at least 6 divorces in the past 25 years. One of his victims was a high-ranking official in the Canadian Armed Forces. At one time, he was even accused of pedophilia, but the authorities were never able to follow through on the accusation. A number of articles on the internet published photos of Philip with 5 women at the same time, all referred to as companions. Several of the photos showed Karen dressed to the hilt, in clothes I had never seen her wear before. Some articles referred to her as his married American companion. She looked so lively and happy in these photos, apparently not caring what anyone thought. As you can imagine, some of the comments on these articles were not too favorable to her. One comment read, "You meant to say, married American fool. Corrected it for you? Does her husband know about this?" I was tempted to reply, but decided not to. A couple weeks after arriving at the rehab center, I got a call from a friend, Kirkward, who worked for a company out of Cincinnati. The company had worked extensively with General Electric, designing and building engines for military and commercial aircraft, and, he said, they were looking for an engineer for several new projects. The only downside was that I would have to move to Cincinnati. I didn't want to leave Albany, but I didn't see much of a future here. Kirk told me that I was welcome to work right after the new year if I was available. I decided to take him up on his offer. What the hell, I thought. I don't have a job here, and I certainly don't have a marriage anymore, so there was nothing holding me back. I had hardly seen Karen or Avril since entering the hospital, and that was a good thing, I thought. The doctor had made it clear to them that I needed to be stress-free, and since Karen's actions were the reason I was in the hospital, they had to keep their distance from me. So far, I'd only seen them a couple times, and that was fine with me. I did a little research on divorce laws and decided to act on it, but I needed a good attorney to protect my assets. I spoke with a couple of attorneys who came to my rehab center, and both impressed me. I checked them out and saw that both had very good references. It was just a matter of deciding which lawyer to use. In late September, Karen and Avril visited me and informed me that Avril's family, and I believe Karen's extended family, would be coming in October to celebrate Thanksgiving. Canadian Thanksgiving, that is. "We'd love for you to come and hang out with us," Karen said. "Why?" I asked. "It's your family, not mine." "The boys will be there too," Karen told me. I hadn't seen the boys in a while, so I told them I would check with the staff to see if that could be arranged. "We can pick you up if you want," Karen said. I shook my head. "No, I'll take a cab if I go." "When will that be?" I asked. "The second Monday in October," Karen said. "We'll have turkey and stuffing and everything. Don't you want a nice turkey dinner?" That sounded good to me, but I had another idea. "Sounds good," I said. "We'll see." "Dinner will be at 6:30 p.m., so we'll expect you there," she said. After they left, I talked to the doctor in charge of my rehab and got permission to travel on the condition that I return in the evening. I then called the lawyer I had chosen for my divorce and informed him of the matter. "Do you want it delivered at 6:30 p.m. on the second Monday in October?" asked Ron, my attorney. "Bingo," I said. "We can do that," he said. "Just curious. Why this particular date and time?" I told him my reason, which elicited a chuckle. "A little revenge, huh?" he asked. "I can understand that. Consider it done." I thanked him and ended the conversation. When the appointed time came, I caught a cab and went to the house. I no longer considered it mine, as far as I was concerned. It was Karen's now. I rang the doorbell, and an embarrassed Karen answered. "Why are you ringing the doorbell?" she asked. "It's still your house." "I didn't mean to be rude," I said. She led me inside and introduced me to everyone. The house was full of people, 2 grandmothers, kids, aunts, uncles, and everyone else. For a moment, I was glad I wasn't staying here overnight. I said almost nothing to Avril's family members, just enough to avoid sounding rude. Honestly, I felt like an insect being observed through a microscope. I spotted my 2 sons and headed toward them. "Good evening, Oscar," I said, shaking his hand. "It's good to see you. By the way, who is this?" I asked, looking at the young man with him. "This is Mark," he said. "Mark, this is my father, Robert MacDonald," he added, turning to Mark. "Please call me Rob," I said, shaking his hand. It was obvious that Oscar was a little nervous. "It's nice to meet you." "Say, are you 2 a couple?" I asked. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. It was obvious there was chemistry between these 2 young men. Mark and Oscar lowered their eyes for a moment. "It's okay," I told them. "All I care about is making sure my kids are happy. Treat my son right, okay?" They looked at me, apparently shocked that I was being so frank with them. Mark smiled and nodded his head. "I will, Rob," he said. "I promise." I hugged Oscar tightly and patted him on the back. "I love you, son," I said. "No matter what, don't ever forget that." He smiled, looking at me. "Thanks, Dad," he said. "I love you too." I turned to my oldest son, Kevin, who was there with an adorable little girl. Looking at him, I realized he was about 6 years old when Karen had carried Philip into the house. "And how are you?" I asked. He smiled, shaking my hand. "I'm doing great, Dad," he said. "It's good to see you." I glanced at the clock. It was about 20 minutes until the show started. "Are you expecting someone?" asked Kevin. His eyes widened at the realization of what was happening. "Did you serve your mom with divorce papers?" he asked. I nodded my head. "Yes, it is," I said. "Look, I know you 2 have kept your mother's secret for 20 years. I don't like it, but I understand. All I'm asking for is 20 minutes. "But here, in front of the family?" he asked. "I don't know any of these people," I said. "They may be distant relatives of your mother's, but they're not mine." "But Dad, we're part of their family too," he said. "They accepted us, and we got to know them well." "I understand," I said. "It's only 20 minutes. That's all I'm asking for." The doorbell rang at 6:30, just as everyone was beginning to settle at the table. I looked at Karen. "I think it's for you," I said. She looked at me in confusion, then went to the door. When she opened it, she saw a man in khakis and a light jacket. "Mrs. Karen MacDonald?" he asked. "Yes, that's me," she said. He handed her a manila envelope and asked her to sign. She signed where he indicated, then looked up at him again. "You've been served, ma'am," he said. "Good afternoon." She looked into the envelope and immediately burst into tears. By this time, everyone had gathered in the front room. "How dare you dishonor your wife like that? And on Thanksgiving, and in front of the whole family," Avril said in shock. Everyone else looked at me in confusion. None of them had expected this. "How dare I embarrass her?" I asked sarcastically. "No. How dare she embarrass me the way she's been embarrassing me for 20 years? Do you think it's embarrassing? Try walking around in my shoes for the last few weeks. How about the embarrassment of my spouse sleeping with another man, and his wife, for over 2 decades? How about the embarrassment the 2 of you planned, showing her infidelity to my face, exposing this abomination to the world?" I paused to catch my breath, feeling my blood pressure start to rise. "Thanks to what she did to you and your husband, I lost my family," I said. "I lost my manhood, my dignity, my job. I almost lost my life. My whole life for the last 20 years has been a goddamn lie. And you want to know the worst part of it all? Everyone in this house, except for me and a couple other people, knew it. And not one of you even lifted a finger to stop it or let me know." I paused to take another breath. By this point, everyone had gone silent. You could hear a pin drop in the house. "And how much do you really know about your one true love, Karen?" I asked. "Did you know he's been guilty of at least 6 divorces? Did you know that the RCMP once investigated him on charges of pedophilia? They were never able to follow through on the charge, but it's on the rumor mill. I looked at a series of shocked faces, including Karen's. I did a little searching too, and guess what I found? I asked. There are quite a few articles on the internet about Philip, and some of them refer to you as his married American companion. We all know what that means. Your pictures with him are quite revealing. I don't think I've ever seen you look so happy with me. I took a couple more breaths to get my blood pressure under control. I didn't make it easy to get a divorce, I said, turning to Karen. I filed for irreconcilable differences, not adultery. I think I was more than fair. I'll leave you half of what we have in the bank. You keep your pension and I'll keep mine. The house is paid for, so you can keep it. All I need are my clothes and personal effects. The rest is yours. I have accepted a job in Cincinnati and will move there after I finish rehab. I suggest you get an attorney to review the papers and then sign them. My lawyer's number is on the file card. Don't argue with me about this, or it will be very unpleasant. I will take myself back to the rehabilitation center myself. You're a stupid, stupid man, said Amy Lefebvre, Avril's 81-year-old mother. You have 2 women here who love you with all their heart. Can't you put your pride aside and let them love you? Do you love me? Karen literally broke my heart. Is that what you do to someone you love? Like I told Avril, I said. It takes a lot more than love. A good marriage requires respect, commitment, and trust. Karen has shown me none of those things with her betrayal, and I refuse to be with her. Now everyone looked down in shame. I decided I had said enough and grabbed the keys to the truck hanging by the door. I turned around, preparing to walk out. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way, I said before getting out. I jumped into my truck and took a few deep breaths before starting it up. After making sure I could drive, I took one last look around the house. Goodbye, old friend, I said before pulling away. This house had been my home for over 2 decades, and it was the only house Karen and I had ever owned. We bought it in the beginning and spent a lot of time, effort, and money to get it to the shape it is now. I will miss it, but I won't miss the bad memories it holds for me now. I went back to the rehab center and lay on my bed, tears streaming down my cheeks. I wiped my face and vowed never to cry over Karen again. That chapter of my life was over. While eating breakfast the next day, I noticed that I had several text messages on my phone. 2 of them were from my sons, rebuking me for the way I had embarrassed their mother. Too bad, I thought. They had been aware of her infidelity from the beginning. I realized they had kept her secret out of loyalty and a desire to please their mother. But at that moment, I wasn't very happy with them. Karen sent me a text begging me to give up on the divorce. That's not going to happen, I thought. I said, no. When I returned from morning therapy, I saw a young couple standing at the door of my room. Good morning, the young woman said. I don't know if you remember me from yesterday, but I'm Simone and this is my husband Georges. I vaguely remembered them from the previous day. Can we come in and talk? Sure, why not? I said. You'll have to forgive me, but yesterday was a little crazy. If I remember correctly, you're Avril's daughter, right? Yeah, she said. It was a little crazy. I was 13 when I first met Aunt Karen and your 2 sons. When she and Daddy went back to Albany, I asked Mom if they were having an affair. She said yes, and said you knew all about it and approved. I didn't quite believe it at the time, but I didn't say anything. I realize now that you didn't know. No, I said. I've trusted her all these years and never thought she'd do something like this. I found out about it when your mother brought the painting into the house after your father died. That's terrible, she said. I'm so sorry for you. I'm so sorry. What's done is done, I said. I'm sorry I ruined your holiday dinner. No, it's all right, she said. Really, it was a little restrained. Aunt Karen made a place for you, and the empty chair spoke volumes. You were right in most of what you said. We all knew, and none of us did anything to stop it. Not all of us approved of it, though. Oh? I asked. Don't get me wrong, she said. I loved my daddy. I still do. But I know he was what you might call a ladies' man. He took what he wanted, and when he wanted it. He loved my mom, and she loved him, so they stayed together. And yes, she had lovers too. I didn't approve, but I couldn't help it. Georges went through something similar, and I could see the pain it caused him. It took him a long time to come to terms with it. At least I didn't end up in the hospital, Georges said. I smiled. Is it true that her infidelity put you in the hospital? Asked Simone. I nodded my head. Yeah, I said. They even have a fancy name for what happened. It's a lot like a heart attack. That's why I'm here. I'm sorry, she said, putting her hand on my arm. I could tell she was sincere. It's okay, I said. They're reassembling me. When they're done here, I'm going to Cincinnati. You did the right thing in divorcing your wife, Georges said. And I applaud you for destroying the painting. But at some point you will need to forgive your wife in order to move on with your life. Trust me. Thank you, I said. But I'm not quite ready for that yet. Maybe after the divorce is finalized. Karen still doesn't think she did anything wrong. Maybe she'll change her mind, Simon said. Maybe, I said. But I'm not going to stand around holding my breath waiting for it to happen. We talked for another half hour before they got up to leave. Accept our invitation to visit us in Montreal sometime, she said. Perhaps for the holidays. You are welcome to come anytime. Thank you, Simone, I said. I appreciate it. Maybe I'll do it someday. Georges and I shook hands, and Simone kissed my cheek before they left. After the day's therapy and counseling sessions, another visitor came to see me, Avril, and she didn't look too happy. Please, Avril, I said. If you're going to tell me that I should forgive Karen and take her back, don't waste your breath. All right, she said. I won't. I just want you to know that she's hurting just as much as you are, maybe even more. Oh? Asked I. How can that be? I thought she had everything she wanted, and a new family to boot. She cries every night, Avril said. She has nightmares too, nightmares about your dead parents judging her for what she did. So she has a conscience after all, I said. But it's a little late for that, don't you think? She loves you, Avril said. And frankly, so do I. Why can't you just let us love you and heal your heart? As I pondered her words, I had an idea. You know, it just hit me, I said. You have no idea what I'm going through because you've never been in a serious relationship. That's ridiculous, she said. I was married to Philip for many years. You were married, that's true, I said. But let's face it. Neither of you were faithful to the other. You both had lovers outside of marriage. You can't understand what fidelity is because you've never tasted it. You can't know what it's like to love someone solely because they ripped your heart out. It would be like me trying to explain the structure of a jet engine to someone who has never seen an airplane. What do you suggest? She asked. I was just making an observation, that's all, I said. So you're going to get a divorce no matter what happens to your wife? She asked. Yes, I said. After all, she's been with Philip for 20 years, not caring one bit about how it would affect me. That's not true, she said. Karen has often said that she never meant to hurt you. She never disrespected you, and for that matter, neither did Philip. Maybe not with words, but they both disrespected me with their actions and lies, I said. So this is your last word? She asked. I nodded my head. Pretty much, I said. She mocked our marriage, humiliated me, robbed me of my manhood. I have to make things right. Very well, she said. I'm really sorry about that. We could do something together. I smiled. I didn't doubt Avril. She was certainly pleasant to look at. But there were principles at work here that she just couldn't understand. And I was starting to get tired of trying to explain it to her. Perhaps sometime in the future, she began. Not until after I'm divorced, I said. Technically, I'm still married, and I'm strictly a one-woman man. Avril kissed me before she got ready to leave. You didn't say no, she said. So, there's still hope. My rehab was going according to plan, and my heart condition was steadily improving. It also helped that Karen and Avril had finally decided to leave me alone for a while. About 2 weeks after that dreaded Thanksgiving Monday, I got a call from my lawyer. How are you feeling, Rob? He asked. It's getting better, I said. It's getting stronger. Why? What's happening? Well, he began. Karen wants to have one last meeting with you before she signs the papers. Is she disputing something? I asked. No, Rob, she just wants to talk to you one last time, he told me. What do you think? I asked. What could it hurt? He asked. A quick meeting. You argue your point, let her speak. Then she'll sign. Okay, I said. Go ahead and organize it. Can we do it here at the rehab center? I don't see why not, he said. I'll bring a notary with me, and we can set the record straight. We set up a meeting in my room at the rehab center 2 days later and ended the conversation. I made sure to warn the nurses so no one would disturb us. 2 days later, my lawyer and I were sitting in my room when Karen and her lawyer walked in. We introduced ourselves to each other, and I turned to Karen, noticing that she looked like she had spent a lot of time crying. How are you holding up, Karen? I asked. What do you think? She asked. I told you I would love you until the day I die, but apparently that's not enough for you, is it? You wanted this meeting? I said. So let's get down to business. She sat up and looked at me, twirling her rings in her hands. Straight to the point then, she said. Okay. Rob, I don't want this divorce. I want us to fix what's wrong, put it behind us, and move on. And how are you going to do that? I asked. Do you have a device that can take us back in time to when you met Philippe de Monte? Can you do that? Or do you think I should just ignore what you've been doing for the last 2 decades? Don't be silly, Rob, she said. I told you I still love you, and I always will. Isn't that enough? No, I said. We've talked about this before. You think it's perfectly okay to cheat on me, to bring another man into our home while I was at war, and all the while deceiving our children. How can I trust and believe you again? In anything? After all, you've become very skilled at lying over the past 2 decades. Rob, I promise I'll never do anything like that again, she said. And I'm supposed to believe you? I asked. Really? Every time you walk out the door, I'm going to wonder if you're going to meet another French-Canadian artist. Every time you say something, I'll wonder if it's true. You don't love me anymore? She asked. I never stopped loving you, I said. That's why your betrayal hurts so much. Believe me, it would be so much easier if I hated you. I could have just walked away and gotten it over with. You just don't get it, do you? You said Philip was a good man. Tell me, what man is responsible for 6 divorces? 7, counting ours. Tell me, please, I want to know. I realize you're hurting, she said, and I realize it's my fault. But can't you put it behind you and move on? You mean pretend it never happened, right? I asked. Pretend that 20 years of lies, cheating, and deceit never happened? Pretend you never brought another man into our home while my life was in danger overseas? Maybe you want me to pretend that that picture of you never existed? Is there nothing I can do or say to change your mind? She asked. I shook my head. No, I said. There's no fixing what you did. Look. It made my blood pressure skyrocket again. Please, you had a meeting, so sign the papers and let's get this sham marriage over with. She lowered her gaze, wiping a tear from her eye. After a couple minutes, she nodded her head. All right, Rob, she said. You win. I'll sign the papers since you're so willing to throw away 25 years of marriage. I didn't throw anything away, Karen, I said. You did the first time you invited Philip into our home. Karen wiped a tear from her eye, then picked up a pen and signed the papers. The notary my lawyer brought in stamped and signed. My lawyer gathered up the papers and put them in a briefcase. I'm filing this in court today, he said. You'll get a final judgment in a few months. Thank you, I said. I turned to Karen again. When my rehab is over, I'll come get the rest of my stuff. I don't need much, just clothes, tools, and electronic equipment. I'll call you and make arrangements. Okay, she said. You want my rings? I shook my head. No, I said. I gave them to you. They're yours. Do what you want with them. I'm sorry, Rob, she said. I still love you and I always will. Please believe that. I nodded my head, saying nothing. She left the room in tears. I signed the papers giving my attorney power of attorney for the bank accounts and other legal paperwork regarding the house. About 3 weeks later, I was released from the rehab center. By then, my attorney had given me a check for my half of our bank accounts. The doctors and counselors gave me orders that basically boiled down to the following: eat right, exercise, and avoid stress. I called Kirk to let him know I'd be in Cincinnati soon, and he gave me the address of the apartment the company had set aside for me. After calling Karen, I got in my truck, rented a small U-Haul trailer, and headed to the house. Karen answered my call and let me into the house. She looked like she had aged about 10 years since I had last seen her. I walked into the house and saw that she and Avril had already boxed up my clothes and electronics. Next to the boxes was a large television. I checked the boxes and found everything neatly folded and packed. They even gave me some plates, pots and pans for my new apartment, and Karen had packed some pictures of our kids. "We wanted to make sure you had everything you needed for the new place," Karen said. I thanked her for that. I loaded all my stuff and was surprised when I was handed a trunk full of food and drinks. "What's that for?" I asked. "I wanted you to have enough food for the trip," Karen said with tears in her eyes. I set the trunk on the floor and opened my arms to hug her. She flew into my arms and hugged me tightly, sobbing. "Oh my God, Rob," she cried. "I'm so sorry. I will always love you." I hugged her tightly and remembered the last time we felt love as husband and wife. "I'll always love you too," I said. It was the truth. Even though she had hurt me deeply, I knew I would always have feelings for her. Avril came over to us and hugged us both, crying. We held each other like that for a few minutes. I broke the hug and looked at them, tears threatening to fall down my face. "I'd better go," I said. "Okay, Rob," Karen said. "Please let us know when you get here, and remember, we love you." I smiled and nodded my head. "I'll call you when I get there," I said. I drove away and saw them standing in the yard waving at me as I drove away. I got to my new place in Cincinnati, unpacked, and returned the trailer. I called Karen and told her my new address. At the end of the conversation, she told me that they both loved me. I settled into my new apartment and looked around the neighborhood. I had always liked Albany, but I had grown to love Cincinnati. Kirk, knowing my personal situation, invited me to spend Thanksgiving with his family, and I graciously accepted. A few weeks later, Christmas came, a holiday I knew I would dread. Christmas had always been special to our family, and I felt strange and lonely not having anyone to celebrate it with. I decided to volunteer at a local homeless shelter for the holiday, thinking it would help take my mind off my loneliness. While serving meals and interacting with homeless families, I remembered my grandfather's words. "I used to feel sorry for myself because I had no shoes. Then I met a man who had no feet." That certainly applied here. I was surprised when I received a Christmas card from both of my sons, but even more surprised when I received a sweet card from Karen and Avril. It was signed, "We both love you and miss you very much." At first I was upset because I hadn't sent anything to either of them. I called my sons, who told me that Karen and Avril were in Montreal. I called Simone and George and talked to them, and then I talked to Karen and Avril. "We love you, Rob," they said when I was done talking. I dove headfirst into my work, and it was very therapeutic. I would hear from Karen from time to time, and she would always end the conversation by telling me that she loved me. In mid-January, I was curious to know how their exhibition went, so I did a search. The reviews I read were somewhat mixed, with most critics calling it boring. Something told me that Avril didn't like it too much. By the end of April, I received the final divorce decree. "Congratulations," my lawyer wrote on a sticky note. "You are a free man." Wow, I thought sarcastically as I opened my beer. My life consisted of a job and a one-bedroom apartment. Despite Kirk's best efforts, I just wasn't in the mood for dating and going out. The calls from Karen and Avril had stopped too, which I appreciated. One Thursday in mid-August, almost a year after Avril showed up on my doorstep with Karen's portrait, I got a call from Kevin. "Dad," he said, "you need to go back to Albany." "Why?" I asked. "What's going on?" "It's Mom, Dad," he said. "She's in the hospital, and they don't think she'll make it to the weekend." "What?" I asked. "What happened?" "She was diagnosed with a very aggressive disease a few months ago," Kevin says. "They've done everything they can, but nothing is helping. She's asking for you, Dad. She wants to see you before she dies." I thanked him for letting me know and called Kirk, who gave me the day off and said he'd straighten things out with HR. I packed up my stuff in my truck and hit the road. When I arrived at the hospital, I saw Kevin and Oscar outside. They took me to their mother's room. "Thanks for coming, Dad," Oscar said. "Avril is with her, but she keeps asking for you." "No problem, son," I said. "What do the doctors say?" "They say she doesn't have more than a couple hours to live," Oscar said. "As long as she's conscious, but it won't be long." When we entered the room, I was stunned. The beautiful woman I had seen just last year was gone. She looked tired and haggard, her eyes red and sunken. She had lost almost all of her hair and wore a gray turban on her head. She raised her head as I entered. "Rob?" she asked weakly. "Is it really you? Did you come to see me?" "Of course, Karen," I said, sitting down next to her. I noticed she was still wearing her wedding and engagement rings. She reached for me, tears welling up in her eyes. I pulled her as close to me as her IVs would allow. "Oh, Rob," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry for what I did. I was wrong and hurt you so much. Can you forgive me?" I thought about what Georges had told me last year and realized that this was the first time she had ever admitted she was wrong. I knew I had to forgive her, even though it would be the hardest thing I'd ever done. "See, I'm still wearing my wedding ring. I told you I would love you until the day I die." "I love you too, Karen," I said, my eyes watering, "and I forgive you." She started sobbing, and I cried along with her. Avril pulled out a Kleenex and wiped her eyes. Karen took Avril's hand and put it in hers. "Please, Rob, promise me you'll let Avril heal your heart," she begged. I looked at Avril, who smiled and nodded her head. "It's okay. We're not married anymore," Karen said softly. I nodded my head. "Okay," I said. "I promise." Karen smiled weakly and turned to Avril. "Please, Avril," she said, "treat my husband better than I do. Will you do that for me?" Avril brushed away a tear before answering. "I will, Karen," she said. "I promise." We all hugged each other, shedding tears, and I could hear the boys snorting as they watched. "He's a one-lover and doesn't like to share," Avril told Karen. Avril smiled and looked at me. "I've heard," she said. "Maybe he can teach me something about loyalty and fidelity?" Karen smiled for a few seconds. The smile faded, and her eyes glazed over. I could hear her breathing change and knew she wouldn't last much longer. I leaned in close to her ear. "It's okay, Karen," I said. "We love you." She took a few more breaths and fell silent. I looked over and saw that her eyes were fully dilated. Alarms sounded, monitors went off, and the room quickly filled with medics who examined her before pronouncing her dead. Avril, the boys and I gathered in one corner of the room and mourned her death. Soon, her body was wheeled out of the room. A doctor approached us. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "I understand Miss MacDonald wanted to donate her body for research into this disease. The hospital will make all arrangements for her transfer." We thanked him and left the room, still in a state of shock. We went back to the house Karen and I had once shared and sat in the living room drinking coffee. I never thought I'd come back to this place. "What's wrong?" I asked. "After you left, Karen fell into a deep depression," Avril said. "I did everything I could, but nothing helped. We went to Montreal for a vacation, but that didn't help either. She threw herself into the exhibition, but got even more depressed when things didn't go as well as we had hoped. The only time she was happy was with you." "Was she seeing anyone?" I asked. Avril shook her head. "No," she said. "She refused to do it, even though I suggested it to her several times." About a month before the divorce became final, she began to get sick. I suggested she go to the doctor, but she refused. She only went when she was too sick to work. By then it was too late. She was diagnosed with a very aggressive disease. They tried chemotherapy and radiation, but it was too late. "Damn it," I said. "She must have told me something." "There was nothing you could do, Rob," Avril says. "They talked about surgery, but by then the disease had spread throughout her body. The only thing they could do was minimize her pain." "What does it mean to donate her body for research?" I asked. "She made that decision as soon as they realized she was in the terminal," Kevin said. "She discussed it with us and said that's what she wanted to do. She didn't want her death to be a burden on the family and thought it might help someone else in her situation. "Do you boys mind?" I asked. They nodded their heads. "It's what she wanted to do," Oscar said. "I support her decision." I nodded my head. "Anything else I should know?" I asked. "Karen passed the house on to you," Avril said. "She also left everything to you in her will." "I asked. She nodded her head. "Yes," Avril said. "In her mind, you were still her husband, even after the divorce." She opened the coffee table drawer, pulled out an envelope, and held it out to me. "She wrote this for you just before she went into the hospital for the last time." I opened the envelope and pulled out a paper with a handwritten note to Karen. "My dear Rob," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm dead. I've had a lot of time to think about everything you said last year, and I've come to the conclusion that you were right and I was wrong. About everything. For starters, I shouldn't have opened up to Philip the way I did. I should have confided in you first, not him. But I didn't. I don't know why, and I could never find a way to explain it in a way you would understand or accept. And I shouldn't have brought him into our home. I realize now that it was completely unacceptable. I now realize the impact of what I did to you, including your treatment of our children. And yes, they are your children. I now know that I was the one who betrayed you and broke your heart. There are no words to fully express how sorry I am for everything I did to you. I promised to love you until the day I die, and at least I have kept that promise. I only hope that you can find it in your heart to forgive me for all that I have done. I handed the house back to you and decided to donate my body to medical science. I did this for 2 reasons. First, I don't want my death to be a burden to you. Second, I hope they can find a cure for this disease so that no one else will have to suffer like I have in the past few months. I also want you to find love with another woman, someone who can love you the way you deserve. Avril has very strong feelings for you, and I sincerely hope things work out for the 2 of you. I'm very tired, so I have to go, but please remember, Rob, that I do love you with all my heart, and I'm sorry for all the hurt and pain I've caused you. She signed it. To your loving wife, Karen. I folded the note and put it back in the envelope. I looked at Avril, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "Did you read it?" I asked her. She shook her head. "No," she said. "I know she wanted to express her regrets to you. She was tormented by guilt for the last months of her life." "Was she really serious about us being together?" I asked. She nodded her head. "Yes," she said. "She was very serious." "What do you think of that?" I asked. "I'd love to try it," she said. "We've both lost a lot. Perhaps together we can ease each other's pain?" Her words made sense. I pondered the possibility of a potential relationship with Avril. She was very beautiful, and I hadn't been with a woman in about a year. Poetic justice, perhaps. Before I spoke, I looked back at Avril. "I have a question and one condition," I said. "Oh?" she asked. "And what do you want to ask?" "I'm strictly a one-woman man," I said. "I didn't have anyone else until Karen and I got married, and I've never had another woman. Never. I'm not the sharing type. Can you live with that?" She smiled, nodding her head. "Yes," she said. "I can certainly relate to that. Karen and I have talked about it too. I promise that if we are meant to be together, I will remain faithful to you." "Then I have one condition," I said. "What is it?" she asked. "We'll replace the bed in the master bedroom," I said. Epilogue. I just finished filling out my tax return for the year and took a close look at my finances. The last 6.5 years have been quite exciting, to say the least. After explaining the situation, Kirk was able to arrange for me to work remotely from my home in Albany 3 weeks out of the month. 1 week a month, I was to spend at the company headquarters to work with the designers on their teams. Avril kept her promise and even stayed with me in my 1-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati during the weeks I needed to be there. After what I had experienced with Karen, I had adopted the old trust but verify rule. Avril understood my motives and did her best to earn my trust. Over the past few years, she hadn't just numbed the pain of Karen's betrayal. She had replaced my first wife, becoming my soulmate. Her family approved of our relationship and accepted me as Avril's spouse. Even her children started calling me Daddy Rob and considered my 2 sons their half-siblings. We spent many holidays in Montreal with the family, and they came to Albany to share some holidays with us. They were wise enough not to broach the subject of Karen and Philip, at least in my presence. Avril has not only taught me to love her, but also to speak French well enough to hold an intelligent conversation. Even better, I no longer need a French-English dictionary to translate her. As I sat here looking at my finances, I remembered how I once told Karen that I wanted to retire at 60 and take a cruise around the world with her. As I looked at my portfolio, I realized that I could do that now, and after some analysis, I determined that I had more than enough money to not only enjoy the cruise, but to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I just didn't have a wife to share it with. At least not yet. I picked up the small box that lay on my desk and wondered if what I had in mind was right. How would it affect my job? Would she accept my proposal? After a while, I realized I was overanalyzing the situation and decided to throw caution to the wind. To hell with it, I thought. Time to stop analyzing and start living. I put the box in my pocket, took the bucket that held the bottle of champagne I had bought earlier, and 2 flutes. "Show's on," I said to myself as I walked up the stairs. Avril's delighted squeals as I retrieved the ring were music to my ears. Dear viewers, we have come to the end of our incredible story of Rob and Karen, which was not just a story, but a journey through the deepest and darkest corners of human feelings. This story showed us that love and betrayal can go hand in hand, but also how important forgiveness and the ability to move forward is. We saw Rob make the decision to put the past behind him and give himself a chance at a new beginning with Avril, despite all the pain and disappointment he went through. It shows that even after the deepest trauma, there is room for healing and the possibility of new love. Karen, for her part, faced the consequences of her decisions and was forced to admit her mistakes. Her last words and actions before her death reflect a deep remorse and a desire for Rob to find happiness, even if it meant happiness without her. It reminds us that true love sometimes requires us to be willing to let go of another for their good. Avril, who at first seemed like just another member of a complicated love triangle, is revealed as someone capable of deep feelings and willing to support Rob in his journey to healing. Her relationship with Rob demonstrates that love can arise in the most unexpected places and that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. This story is an example of how love, betrayal, and forgiveness can weave people's lives together, creating a complex but ultimately beautiful picture of the human experience. It shows that while the heart can be broken, it can also be healed, and that sometimes forgiveness is the key to our own liberation. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this story is memorable and makes you think about your own relationships and capacity for forgiveness. Don't forget that the full version of this story is available on our Patreon, where you can find even more of the details that wove this story.